Welcome back to A Podcast of Mars, the Sword and Planet podcast featuring Greg O'Driscoll and James Hansen. This episode, we're going to be featuring not the originally intended topic of Buck Rogers, one of the three tentpole characters of Sword and Planet genre. We didn't do our homework. We were supposed to review the original novel from which it was based. We're a little behind on our reading and collecting some of the source material that we're going to review for that Buck Rogers podcast. So we decided instead to return to a much loved subject in the science fiction, science fantasy, space opera, and Sword and Planet communities, the modern classic Star Wars. So we're going to be reviewing that from top to bottom, front to back, and seeing if we can derive some insights about whether or not Star Wars is in fact Sword and Planet, what effect it had on the genre, and what effect the genre had on it. So, without any further ado, we're going to jump right in.
So yeah, I've been kind of like jamming on Star Wars
Yeah.
lately. I just watched like the second prequel film, but like basically, what do we? Oh, we started watching The Mandalorian, and that's what did it.
Ah,
Like
okay.
like a month ago. Dana's always looking like she likes to watch TV shows together. And I'm just like, if we're sitting together, we're together. Whether we're both looking at the screen or I'm looking at a book and you're looking at a screen,
Yeah,
it's really just about being together and enjoying
sure.
the. But she likes to find shows that we both pay attention to and watch. So like I told her, I was like, oh, these Marvel shows, and we watched a few of them, and I enjoy them all. Like my standards are not as high, I guess as like all the other nerds out there. I'm like, for the most part, I like them all. So we started watching The Mandalorian, and that kind of got me like, I want to watch some more Star Wars type stuff. And
Right.
we watched the sequel trilogy again,
Okay.
and then that just kind of got the ball rolling. And I watched some. I watched two. I watched like what is it? Attack of the Clones and
Mm-hmm.
Phantom Menace. Were those both today? I guess those were both today.
Cool. Doing the
Um,
marathon. All right.
yeah. Well, actually, I watched one. Then my wife like watched a movie, and after it was done, like it was about an hour until dinner, so I watched half of it, and then after dinner I watched the other half. And actually, right when we were texting, I was just about to finish it up, and then I was like, well, I have seen this thing 100 times. And
Right.
but it's one of those things, that you want the original trilogy, but you've already watched it so many times. It's like you need a Star Wars fix. You've
Yeah.
already watched your original trilogy like 800 times, so it's like it's almost boring
Yeah.
at this point. So you're like, well, what else has lightsabers in it?
Well, it's funny because all of it does what it's supposed to do on some level. I mean, like,
Yeah.
we've talked about this before prior to doing these podcasts and stuff, but like nothing is ever going to make you feel like you felt when you were a kid watching that stuff.
I didn't watch that stuff as a kid.
Really?
I saw Star Wars. My dad wasn't interested in Star Wars, and I basically watched the movies he was interested in,
Oh,
except for like stuff like Superman. Like if I had an interest, like, oh, Batman's out, Superman's out, but like,
right.
the last Star Wars movie came out, what, 83 or something like that? 84?
I got to be honest with you. I'm not like great with the dates,
I think
but
Return of the Jedi was like 83, and I was 3 years old.
okay.
We got a Betamax in like the mid 80s,
Right.
and by then, I was into like Masters of the Universe and like kind of the stuff that came after Star Wars. So like, I think my dad didn't like, oh, hey son, I love these movies, because
Right.
he didn't care about Star Wars. To him, he liked Star Trek.
Okay.
Not that you have to like one or the other, but like I remember he loved watching Star Trek: The Next Generation in the
Well,
early
not for
90s.
nothing. There's a lot of overlap with the fandom now, but there's very definitely there are people that like them both, but still have a strong preference for one or the other. And there's a lot of people that do prefer Star Trek. There are a lot of people where obviously it's like to them, and for many good reasons, it's the more realistic take on what it's going to be
Oh yeah,
like. You
yeah.
know,
No, I actually do. Out of those, my probably if I had gun to my head, it's so close. But I think original series Star Trek, which I didn't even watch until I was in my 20s, really like sit down and watch, is probably the one I prefer
okay,
because I like more of the Twilight Zone-ish kind of like weird
right,
phenomena type
right,
stuff. Whereas, you know, uh, Star Wars is just laser swords in space and like classic,
yeah,
mythic adventure. Not that I hate that stuff. I love that stuff, obviously. But to me, like the Star Trek is now if you gave Spock a lightsaber, then you
right.
have the best of all worlds, but
Well,
what
here,
can you
here we
do?
go. I'll get all like, psychologist couch here with it. We'll bring it back to Star Wars for a minute. So when did you first watch Star Wars?
I watched Star Wars. I think I was about 14 or 15 years old. They had a marathon. I fell into some friends who were geeks,
Mm-hmm.
and they really were they were like reading the Timothy Zahn novels and yada yada.
Right,
Yeah, and I didn't
right,
really care, but they're your buddies, so you're just kind
Yeah.
of going along with them. So about 14 or 15 in USA, played like all 3 in a row, like on Christmas. You know how they used to do that? Now TBS I
Hmm.
think does it.
Hmm.
And I had a VHS tape that had 6 hours, so I could kind of fit the whole trilogy onto one VHS tape of
Right.
EPS.
Right.
So I did that, and I enjoyed them, but I didn't go gaga for it. I was like, yeah, this is cool. I enjoy this.
Right.
And then the first thing I actually went gaga for Star Wars wise was the Phantom Menace, because I was really into Hong Kong fight choreography, like
Right.
Jackie Chan and Jelly, and the Darth Maul lightsaber duels were like, oh my god, these are so cool, and Darth
Right.
Maul looks so cool. He's flipping and doing all the Jet Li stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
first thing I really went wild for. It wasn't really so much because of I love the Star Wars universe. I just loved.
Bringing up Darth Maul, what I find funny about Darth Maul is I feel like the facial tattoos or whatever that he's got going on
Right.
were very definitely like meant to kind of create like a tigerish sort of look with like red and black. It's almost like striped or whatever. And the irony is that he turned out to be a paper tiger, because
Right.
he looked really awesome, he looked really tough, and then like didn't really do a whole lot and died.
I thought that was probably the biggest mistake of the prequels.
It absolutely was.
They should have, like, instead of bringing in, I like Christopher Lee and everything, but instead of bringing in Count Dooku, they should have made him the main Sith guy. And then they had General Grievous in the third one. They should have just written it so that it was all Darth Maul, and then Obi-Wan avenges his master in the third one by killing Darth Maul.
Right.
And they think by defeating Darth Maul, they defeated the Sith, but then Palpatine's the real muscle, yada, yada, yada. That's because they had a great iconic villain, with Darth Maul, and they just threw him away, basically. I always thought he looked kind of like one of those, those South American salamanders that have those really weird prints all over their bodies.
Yeah.
That's what he kind of like. And he got like the horned toad kind of thing with the little horns. So that's kind of what he always reminded me of.
Well, I will take it even a step further, with the alternate scenario that you just proposed. And I do agree. Like, I love Christopher Lee. And I actually think Count Dooku was kind of a cool character, but I will even take it a step further. And I think that Darth Maul probably should have been a more significant presence throughout like all 3 of the prequels. But I would even take it to where perhaps because of the growing rivalry between Obi-Wan and Anakin, or even perhaps, just for whatever reason, like Anakin kills Darth Maul, and that's also part of like replacing him as the apprentice beneath the Emperor.
And that's what happened. Yeah, killed Christopher Lee, and then
and whatever the paths that might have been. I mean, like, here's the thing. It's funny, like I find that this phrase is applied most often to religions and mythologies, but it's very applicable to Star Wars. And Star Wars is a syncretic product. It's like all of these different things kind of like lumped together and mashed together. And a lot of fiction is like that. We know that. But especially Star Wars, it's this crazy pop culture mishmash of, you got Flash Gordon, you got like Kurosawa, you got
Dune.
Yeah, Dune, and boy,
World War II fighter movies.
Yeah, World War II fighter movies. I mean, there's just the Wizard of Oz.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. I was kind of thinking as we were talking, just right before we were talking about doing this, is someone described Kill Bill as like the ultimate kung fu mixtape, because it was like a combination of all the tropes of kung fu movies through Quentin, and that's kind of like what I've always thought of Star Wars. It was the ultimate Pulp Fiction or pulp sci-fi mixtape. It's got like all the various things combined into like one super mix, and then it's got that little like that new coat of paint thanks to Ralph McQuarrie and John Williams.
Yep, absolutely. And relevant to our podcast and a lot of the stuff that we talk about, the question would kind of become, I mean, it's like, Star Wars is like the elephant in the room. You're not going to talk about sci-fi. You're not going to really talk about anything like without coming around to it at some point. So here's the thing, like, everyone calls it space opera, and it is undeniably space opera. It's more, space or science fantasy as opposed to science fiction. But is it Sword and Planet?
Well, the thing is, I would have to say no, because, like I said, Sword and Planet, I think to some extent has to be that portal fiction, where you have a man from Earth that goes to another planet and it's kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm confronting this whole new culture
Right.
that I don't understand. And it's,
Right.
we've talked about some of the tropes on the John Carter episode, whereas Star Wars, it doesn't feature, like, the characters are all very comfortable in the environment. They're part of the environment. And, the star of Sword and Planet is the planet. There is, well, they go to these little planets. There's the ice planet and the desert planet. The planets aren't really the star. The star is the, basically the Jedi saga, I guess you could say.
Right.
The kind of samurais, space samurais,
Right.
essentially.
I'll agree with you to an extent. I'm not going to make a case that it is Sword and Planet because, like you said, it's fresh coat of paint. It's this mishmash of all these other things, but it very firmly, even if it is not Sword and Planet, like according to Hoyle, Sword and Planet, it very much has its roots in all of that. Just like you said with Sword and Planet, often the environments and the planet is the star. But as we see with other Sword and Planet stories, sometimes, like even with John Carter, yeah, it's Mars, and then it went from Mars to the moons of Mars, and then eventually it went to like Jupiter, with the skeleton men from Jupiter. That's
Right. Well, I mean,
far.
the Venus series is in the same
Right.
universe. He was inspired by John Carter.
Right.
And of course, there's the connection, right? Jeds and Jedis, Banths and
Yep.
Banthas.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's clearly an influence, like you say, sword in one hand, laser in the other hand. That's your favorite kind of image.
And
it does fit it, but I would just kind of say that it's not quite. It's like Superman is science fiction,
but
to
not
a
quite.
certain extent. But
yeah,
it kind of becomes its own genre.
Yeah.
From the differences from the original inspiration.
Because, and they tried to do this with the Flash Gordon movie in the 80s, and it's funny because Star Wars had already done it. Very much one of the qualities of the Flash Gordon stuff, which, originally Lucas tried to get the rights for Flash Gordon and couldn't. King Features wanted too much money, so he just kind of started doing his own thing. But instead of in the Flash Gordon saga, you always have like going from kingdom to kingdom and place to place on Mongo. Right. There's the underwater world of Mongo, the forest kingdom of Arborea, the icy, wastes of like the kingdom of Phrygia, the burning deserts and jungles of like Tropica. There's all these zones, and the zones are always typified by like a particular environment. And then, of course, being Flash Gordon and Sword and Planet, there's usually some sort of like woman that's representative of the environment that's associated with it. But, with Star Wars, it was planetary. Right. And then in the Flash Gordon movie in the 80s, it seemed as if most of those kingdoms were like these sort of moons that were orbiting the primary planet of Mongo. But it's a similar premise, because planetary geology, biology, ecosystems or whatever, you're not going to have an entire planet. The whole planet is swamp. The whole planet is ice. Right. Yeah, but it doesn't matter. That's not the point. It's like these aren't planets any more than like traveling to the frozen kingdom of Nador, King Arthur and his knights. I mean, it's the same thing. You're just going.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get you, but I guess for me the difference would be, and I think it's a great observation, but I guess with a lot of these Sword and Planet things, like it's like delving into the cultures of these, and it's like, they go to the ice planet of Hoth, but there's no like culture, and like there's no, oh wow, they have a weird religion, or oh they have, now we're stuck with their Aboriginal ice people or whatever. It's like Pirates there, they have their big machines, the rebels are trying to, it's almost like window dressing, whereas it's not the main, like, whereas if it was Sword and Planet, it's the main course. It's what you're there for.
I get it. But incidentally, of course, the Jedis are the weird religion.
Yeah, but they go planet to planet there, so it's like
right.
So he does get inducted into kind of a weird culture and weird religion, but it's like each planet doesn't have a weird. It's Jedis everywhere, it's Empire everywhere, it's smugglers everywhere. It's like everywhere has the same kind of culture to a certain extent. I don't know, like, I mean, to me, like, it's one of those things, it's like arguing, like, is Superman science fiction? It's extremely easy to make the case that it is,
Well, I mean, I'm not trying to argue it. I don't have a particular axe to grind. It's just that,
no, I don't think you're arguing. I think we're just having the discussion.
Yeah, it's like the roots and the connections are there, obviously, just like with Superman and science fiction, Superman and kind of being inspired by John Carter, et cetera. It goes beyond that into its whole own thing. But yeah, the sword, blaster, it has an emperor just like Flash Gordon. It has I mean, even right down to the kind of Deja Thoris slave girl gear with Leia getting trapped by Jabba the Hutt. There's moments and there's callbacks, but like you said, it's not like fully immersed in it. It's not like the sword and planet nature of it is not the star of the show. It's more like Easter eggs scattered throughout, like something else that's a little different, definitely.
Yeah. So, what's interesting about Star Wars is it kind of started out in the 70s, and it came out at a time when, that's whenever you watch a documentary about it, it was all like supposedly all depressing movies, all kind of gritty urban movies.
Right.
And Star Wars was a smash hit because it provided like an escape into fantasy. And it spawned all these other types of shows, the Buck Rogers revival, Battlestar Galactica, Star Trek got a little revival. But it's interesting to me that there was no other, like when Superman arrived, there were other successful superheroes that kind of matched, or at least were in the same ballpark as his popularity. There was Batman and
Right.
Captain America and Captain Marvel and all those other ones. With
Right.
Star Wars, it seems like it's Star Wars and nothing else. And I think Star Trek while it is a sci-fi, it's kind of a different genre of like, it doesn't hit the same buttons. But like,
No.
Battlestar Galactica never became anywhere near as big as Star Wars. Buck Roger, I wonder why that is. Why did even they tried to revive Flash Gordon? Nothing really equaled Star Wars, or even gave it some competition for that in that space opera genre. And why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, it's a combination of a lot of different factors. Battlestar Galactica, one, was a TV show and was episodic. They tried to do a lot of the things that Star Wars did within its movies, like refashioning like westerns or other types of thematic like elements from a movie into a science fiction setting. They even did a little bit of, Battlestar Galactica, the premise was legitimately also a long time ago in a galaxy far away, because they all had these like names that were based in mythology. They played like this weird sport on the planet. It was it had a very like ancient astronaut kind of vibe. Even the helmets looked kind of like a pharaoh's headdress. They were definitely trying to tap into some of that 1970s pyramid power sort of, I won't say mumbo jumbo, but that's what it is to me.
Well, it kind of reminds you of the Eternals. What was that thing? Was it something of the gods? That book that started
Chariots of the Gods by Eric
right,
von
the
Däniken.
Chariots of the Gods thing was really big in the 70s.
And let me tell you, I've read some of those books, and they are just like these, like a syllogism, is where here's the thing, here's two supporting facts that go back and prove the original thing. And it's a very simple like case, like it's a logical argument. But Chariot of the Gods is not like a syllogism. Chariot of the Gods is like this weird circular reasoning where,
right.
Yeah, it was just some of the strangest stuff. God bless the dude. If you can write those kind of books and like sell millions of them and live comfortably, like more power to you.
Oh man, the guy said it's all like the History Channel owes that guy a big check. Those ancient alien shows. Those are so wildly entertaining to me, because like I love every episode to be like, here's an interesting historic fact that no one can explain,
right?
Unless aliens. It's like anything you can't explain, probably aliens.
But the thing is it's like the Buck Rogers revival, like a lot of the special effects, I think, were very important, and that helped give these things a boost. But as simple as it is, as black and white as it is, as basic as it is story wise in Star Wars, it still has like a lot of heart,
Right.
Like it really wears a lot of this stuff on its sleeve. And I'm not saying the other stuff didn't have a lot of heart, but I think it was almost like it was very hokey and played with a straight face, but a lot of it was just kind of like not downright stupid. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
well, I don't. I think you're hitting on it, because here's the thing: even with like the new movies, like you don't like those characters as much as you like Han, Luke, and Leia.
right.
It's kind of like with Seinfeld, how like they just got so lucky. They had 4 great actors in those roles, and it created such a great what's the word?
Synergy.
I don't know. There's just like there was a what's that thing where people a rapport.
Yeah, rapport,
and that's what
chemistry.
Han, Luke, and Leia, and the rest of the bunch. They just all played off each other so well. You liked them together. You liked all 3 of them.
Yep.
And I think I find Rey likable in the new movies, and I like who's the dude who was the stormtrooper dude.
Finn.
Finn. I
Mhm.
like it. I kind of like him, but they just never really quite gelled. And especially in the prequels, Ewan McGregor stole the show. He was great,
Yeah.
but there was really no rapport between Padme and Anakin.
Hmm.
And you didn't get the sense that Anakin and
Yeah.
but you never got the sense that there was like a real rapport or real
Mm.
on-screen chemistry between the big three of the prequel trilogy either. So I think you're hitting on it. There is that kind of
Right.
thing with casting where the actors all have to kind of have a good on-screen presence.
Well, not just that, but let's also like in attempting to create a backstory with the prequel, they're trying to they're trying to retroactively connect things from here to something that already exists. But the nature of the original Star Wars stuff to me was that if you look at the three primary personalities of the three protagonists, Luke, Han, and Leia, essentially what you have is like sort of wide-eyed idealism with Luke. You have like jaded cynicism with Han, and then you have sort of like a take charge practicality with Leia. Like they are
Right.
characters, they're fleshed out, but ultimately they represent, like in any given situation, like if an event occurs, these three people are going to have three different things to say about what's happening.
Right.
And that like it kind of generates the dialogue and sort of like writes the dialogue itself almost. But if you go back and you look at the characters from the prequels, it's like, well, what are the defining characteristics of those characters? Like what is their particular bent per se? And I'm not saying that every character has to represent some philosophical outlook on something, but let's say, I guess Obi-Wan seemed to be initially sort of like good-natured amusement with things. He
Right.
seemed generally upbeat or whatever.
Well,
And
I think they are archetypes, but they're just not likable archetypes. So you have like
yeah,
kind of uh, Padme kind of came across as kind of the stuffy prude.
right,
Um, what do you call it? Obi-Wan was like the annoyed professor.
right, right,
And Anakin was the petulant brat. They're three archetypes. They're just
right,
not three likable archetypes like Han, Luke, and Leia.
right. But those archetypes that you're talking about are archetypes of like,
Supporting
is that,
characters.
well, supporting characters, or more specifically, like you said, characters, but they're not like an ethos or an outlook or a worldview. You can be an annoyed professor, but are you like a nihilist? Are you like a humanitarian? Are you a
Hmm.
utilitarian? Like, there's no grounding kind of like worldview. I feel like that, like these characters like represent,
Well, but I do think it comes back to like the actors themselves. With Han, Luke, Leia, like they're pretty broad characters
yeah,
as written within the
yeah,
original trilogy. I know they probably added a lot of depth in the expanded universe, but just counting
mm,
the three movies, they're
yeah,
very straightforward characters. But the way they're played, you get the feeling that there's more to them. I'd love to see learn more about it. I'd love to see more scenes with them. They
right,
feel like there's more beneath the surface, and we're only seeing like a sliver of what they're all about. Whereas in
right,
you don't get that sense in the other Star Wars movies, and I think that's kind of the actors bringing their own subtext to the role and their own angle. Like Harrison Ford played Han Solo in a different way than Kurt Russell would have played him or any other
yeah,
number of actors. He really brought something to him that made him feel like a real dude. And plus,
yeah,
there's also like kind of I think like he didn't play things as close to the vest with the original trilogy, so
hmm,
there's more room for the other creative people
right,
to add their stuff. Like kind of the legendary like "I love you, I know" was
hmm,
improvised by Harrison
which is one of the
Ford.
greatest moments in the entire series.
Right, and there were like this thing, with his first wife, Lucas's first wife, did the original edit that they said was almost like unreleasable in the original kind of cut, and then she released it. But she, I guess, had a little more insight into people, like
Yeah,
those like little cars that would float around on the Death Star. They're like little remote control cars buzzing around.
yeah,
Like Lucas was like, I'm just gonna get rid of those. They seem kind of pointless. She's like, no, they had charm. She
right,
understood that.
right,
In Raiders of the Lost Ark, originally it was supposed to be just Indiana Jones talking to the government about the Ark, and his wife was like, well, wait a minute, what about the girl? Like,
right,
what do you mean? Her part of the story's done. Yeah, but people are going to care about her. They're going to want to know
right,
what happened to her. That's
right,
kind of what she brought to the table. And I think for Lucas, he's brilliant, but he's got like a very particular thing he wants to do. And just like any other creative person, no one's
yeah.
perfect. And
Yeah.
I think being a little more open to collaboration. I think, I don't think that he was necessarily closed to collaboration, but I think he was unfortunately just surrounded by a bunch of yes men that bought into the legend of George Lucas, the great myth maker,
Yeah.
and they wouldn't tell him something was not working, even if he was genuinely curious.
I mean, things very definitely went awry. That's there. There's no doubt about it. And there are more people than us have armchair quarterback that to death. And I mean,
Oh
don't get me
yeah.
wrong, we're going to armchair quarterback some of that shit to death ourselves. but like it was a different experience for me. I was taking this stuff in like with my mother's milk. I think
Right. I definitely want to hear the story of how you first discovered Star Wars, and I'll talk a little bit more about how I
definitely.
first discovered Star Wars, which is at an older age than
And
most
that's going
people
to
of my
create some
generation.
significant differences, and that's what I'm intrigued about, because when you told me, you were like, I didn't watch Star Wars when I was a kid, I was like, what?
Yeah, no, I mean, I had friends that loved it, but I didn't have it on Betamax, and
Yeah.
there was other, like when you're a kid, you have no money, so you're just like, oh,
Yeah, no, I get it.
I can't rent Star Wars, which I kind of didn't really, it was kind of like not old, but I think the thing was for me, I perceived it as like a lot of fighter pilot stuff.
Right.
And I wasn't into vehicles the way a lot of boys my age were. I didn't get into Transformers. I didn't get into Robotech. I just
Right.
didn't care about vehicles. I liked guys with swords, or
Right.
guys like the Hulk, who, like the
Yeah.
hand-to-hand or sword fighting was a big thing for
Mhm.
me. And if I knew about lightsabers, but I didn't really, every time I turned it on, it was like, or anytime someone was showing me something, it was like Luke on the Death Star or something. I was like, I don't really care about fighter pilots,
Yeah, no, I could see that. I could definitely see that. I was not a vehicle kid. It's funny, my son, he really likes, cars and trucks and things like that. And, that was never like really, I mean, I had that kind of stuff growing up as a kid, but that, like particular types of vehicles intrigued me, but it was always like the irregular stuff. Like the Batmobile was awesome.
Oh, of course, right.
Like even like the General Lee from Dukes of Hazzard, that was cool. But
oh yeah, I loved Dukes of Hazzard as a kid. I tried to get my
Right.
dad to let me go through the window of the car.
right, but the whole thing of just like collecting lots of vehicles and cars and toys.
Yeah, I
that
didn't
was
match
never,
boxes to me weren't, it's funny because
Yeah.
those matchboxes, I didn't care about them, but if they had like some of them had that little plastic man they would build into
Mhm.
it, those were the ones that I'd be like, oh, look at that one. All right, I'll shut my window down.
Pardon. All righty.
All right, so it's the 80s. You're discovering Star Wars.
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, I was born in the 70s, but I wasn't like, 5 until like what, 81. And anything that I say about like how I discovered Star Wars, this is like the myth of it as opposed to the actual concrete reality, because you're told things, you hear things, you have vague like childhood recollections. So, we'll take it all with a grain of salt. But supposedly, if I remember things correctly, my mother said that I saw Star Wars, but I didn't really see it because I was a babe in arms. Right. So how much of like Star Wars I actually saw, and how much of like, my mom's boobs because she was nursing me in the movie theater, that's up for debate. But like,
Right.
as far as a distinct and clear memory, I saw Empire Strikes Back in the theater. And
Oh wow, that was 1980.
yeah, and I was pretty young, but I had babysitters that lived across the street, and one of the easiest ways to take care of me was just like taking me to the movies. So I saw a lot of films, and usually it was double features and stuff like that. Aside from just being completely overawed by the special effects, the creatures, all the just different stuff going on in Empire, one of my most distinct memories is I remember, like, you're a kid, so you're not always looking forward. You're kind of hopping around in your seat sometimes. And I remember always looking over my shoulder up at the projection booth. And the projection booth, it was weird because the glass in the projection booth, the window or whatever, I could see a miniaturized like reflection or negative image of the movie in the glass.
Right.
And so to my 4-year-old mind, I'm thinking like Star Wars is in that little room up there, like in the back of the movie theater, like somehow like it's all actually happening and it's just up in that room. And if I could get up in there, that's where like all the action really is, but I loved it and it was great. And even proceeding after that into the 80s, obviously not having cable, we were just the primary network family with the antenna sticking out of the top of the house. They always made a big deal about it. every summer, maybe twice a year, but at least every summer, you were always guaranteed that Star Wars and then Empire Strikes Back were going to play on like the, Saturday afternoon matinee movie or whatever on like the
That's
major.
fun.
Yeah. So there's like, it creates an almost religious sort of component to it, because you're watching it as like a yearly event. It comes out,
Yeah.
there's a certain like ritual component to it. And my mom, my father enjoyed science fiction and fantasy even to a lesser degree, but my mother was really the one that like always kind of initiated me into all this stuff. She liked it, she enjoyed it, and so if it was on, not only was I watching it, she was watching it, and became like a bonding experience, of course. Ironically, after my folks got divorced, my dad was the one that took me to see Jedi in the theater, because that became our thing. Like it was, you see dad on the weekends, and you go and you see a lot of movies, and like a lot of kids in the 80s, with that sort of arrangement, I saw a lot of movies I probably was not supposed to see.
Yeah, that's every kid in the 80s. I used to
Yeah.
watch. I mean, I saw RoboCop when I was like 9 or 8 or something.
Right.
Like you should never show a kid, but like rated R movies with like sex scenes and graphic violence were just not a big deal back then, I guess.
Right.
Like nowadays, like no way. But like
I don't even get why it's a big deal now. Of course, my wife is constantly,
oh, my wife would shoot me if I
Yeah.
showed my kids RoboCop.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, there, but it's just one of those things. I'm like, it's just, I'll be watching something, and I'm just watching it for the nostalgic feel, and I'm sitting here thinking like, this is a pretty tame movie. And of course, there's like, there's like gut-wrenching violence and bare breasts and people like cursing at each other. I'm
Right.
like, what? This is great. Kids love this stuff.
Yeah, I loved it, and look at me now.
Right? Yeah. I mean,
drinking a liquor straight from the bottle.
Right, yeah. Give me time, man. I'm just drinking mixed drinks right now, but I'm gonna get good and tight while we're talking about this stuff. But suffice it to say, the Star Wars comics were out, so read a lot of the comics, and that was a big portion of it as well. And it affected all aspects of pop culture. I mean, you're a kid, you're at that age, late 70s, early 80s, you're watching Super Friends, right? Well, you can't tell me for a second that like Black Manta's weird garbled up voice isn't like kind of partially inspired by like Darth Vader. That was why I thought Black Manta was cool. He had this big weird mask, kind of menacing eyes, strange voice. In one of the episodes of the Super Friends, there was an evil alien kind of empire with a big ship that was they had some kind of weapon that was supposed to blow up or draw the like energy out of suns. And I didn't make this connection until much later, where you kind of start learning about the behind the scenes and the lore of Star Wars. But the evil guy that was in charge looked very much like a kind of off-brand Darth Vader. He had white stormtrooper like armor, but he had a cape. He had like a weird helmet and mask.
Right.
And the voice actor that was portraying the character was doing an Orson Welles voice. And originally that was the plan. They wanted like a very famous voice actor or someone with a, like the proper gravitas in their voice to be Vader.
Baritone.
And instead of going with Wells, they went with James Earl Jones. The rest is history. But all these little things, like it filtered down to like all of the rest of the pop culture. And for better or
it's
for
one
worse.
of those things with Star Wars, like you can really see, looking historically, like kind of looking back at pop culture before and after certain things come out, like popular music before and after the Beatles,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like you could really see the huge difference there was. And I feel like with Star Wars, you look at anything science fiction movies, anything like that before Star Wars, it's like so different. Like the aesthetic of Star Wars. And I guess the only thing I think that kind of matched Star Wars aesthetically that was probably 2001: A Space Odyssey. When you look at that movie, it had kind of, because NASA had happened, so like instead of all these sleek, silvery, shimmery rocket ships, NASA showing, hey, there's all these panels and things, there's these wires, there's these tubes, there's this and that, and it's like it really affected how space and futuristic space travel was depicted in movies. So Ralph McQuarrie was definitely looking at that. So yeah, it's just interesting because it's definitely big among my generation. I was born in 1980, but I'm still too young to have seen any of them in the theater, at least as first run movies. Because Jedi was 83, I believe, and that I was 3 years old. I wasn't going to any movies when I was 3. my dad wasn't really into Star Wars, I'm sure he didn't hate it, but he just didn't have any
Right.
particular affection for it, so he never really sought it out. And just even though like my best friend was like way into Star Wars, um, I don't know, he just never showed it to me. We just never kind of got it, so I didn't really fully watch all three movies. I've seen bits and pieces of movies. I've heard of the Death Star. I knew that Vader was Luke's father. It's just one of those things in pop culture you just can't
Right.
escape from, especially if you like superheroes and comic books and all that stuff.
But any kind of
Uh,
comedy show or anything like that is going to like do a riff on that at some point.
Right, right.
You know.
So, and I saw a lot of things that were, so probably the first big thing I was ever into was Masters of the Universe, which had a clear Star Wars influence. As
Yeah.
actually the creation of the franchise was a direct response to not getting the Star Wars license when the getting was good. They
Yep.
needed to create their own Star Wars that they owned wholly, and that was Masters of the Universe. But just like anything that like GI Joe, the lasers, the red and blue lasers, just
Mhm.
everything just kind of, you look back on it and like all the science fiction movies that were popular, like Alien and Blade Runner, they all had that kind of feel of like a dirty, lived in future.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you really saw, but as a kid, you didn't know that. So I was about like 14 or 15. Um, and USA would play them around Christmas time. They play all
Yeah.
three movies back to back to back. One year I took out a VHS. I'm gonna record all of these and I'm gonna watch them all, and I enjoyed them. I thought they were good movies, and I
Right.
watched them a few more times. But I didn't go gaga. I wasn't like good. I wasn't gonna go out and get the expanded universe novels or comic books or anything like that. I just like I
Yeah.
enjoyed them, and that was the end. Um, and
I like
ironically,
the
like
comic books. I remember being a kid and enjoying the comics. They were not like one of the comics that I collected regularly. It was very much like if there was a particularly cool cover or if something about the story appealed to me. There's some of the issues have some really great early Walt Simonson art,
right,
um further going back to that like connection to John Carter and the Sword and Planet, of course. uh what Claremont and Simonson originally had a story that was supposed to be for the John Carter comic,
right.
and the John Carter comic got canceled, and Simonson repurposed all of it for an issue of Star Wars. And what it was instead of the giant Tharks, the only way to incorporate them into the Star Wars thing was that it was a planet where the Empire was running an experiment to create giant stormtroopers, and
Oh,
he drew like stormtrooper armor over where the Tharks were supposed to be.
that's funny.
So yeah, there's all these like little backlinks and connections. It's
The only
very
Star
much
Wars comic. I'm sorry.
no, I was just gonna say it's very much rooted in Sword and Planet, and it's all still there, but it grew to be something, much more, and honestly, very significant. I mean, you'd have to be like, I mean, even the yak herders in Tibet have heard of Star Wars. It's just,
Right. Yes, the only Star Wars comic I really just I love and really like take to and reread is actually the comic strip, especially
yeah,
the Russ Manning years of the comic strip.
yeah,
Number one, the art, Al
yep,
Williamson, even better. But that first year of Russ Manning, I really, really like it because it was really before the whole thing was codified and like the
hmm
mythology was set,
hmm
and it just seemed like there was more, the universe felt bigger. They could
yeah,
kind of do the Flash Gordon thing where, oh, we're just running into new world. It just felt like after a while, once things got codified, it was like, hey, we're on Tatooine again. We're on this one
yeah,
again. We're on that one
yeah,
again, and we're just kind of like the universe doesn't really feel quite as big as it did. Whereas with those old comic strips, they could go out somewhere. Oh, we've never even heard of the Jedi or
right,
the Rebellion or the Empire, because the universe was, huge.
yeah.
And
Well, and
that's kind of one of the thing. Yeah,
considering that though, you have to remember that as writers and as creatives, you have to find ways to incorporate the core concepts and characters, but yet not do anything that's going to like wildly impact anything that might happen in the future. You know what I mean?
which
So
is kind of how those old comic strips. But that's why it's so fitting that it's the
yeah,
comic strip, because Flash Gordon was a comic strip, and that's how they
hmm
would in the old days they were written. They didn't affect the story, so you'd have Luke Skywalker going on a solo adventure by himself.
yep,
He meets some chick, he falls in love, maybe she dies or something. They have to separate. It's this whole
right,
adventure, and then on to the next one's about Han. He's got some side deal. Him and Chewbacca have to go do XYZ, and just
hmm
I don't know. It really made it feel like a freewheeling universe where the whole thing with the Star Wars movies was that it was like the Civil War was the whole thing.
yes,
Whereas in those comic strips, it felt like the Civil War was the backdrop.
Yeah.
There's kind of like those old World War II movies, like the Nazis are always kind of lurking around, but like unless you were directly involved with the war, you just kind of had to avoid them to have your classic pulpy adventures.
Well, yeah, I mean, to elaborate on your point, think about Casablanca, which is regarded as a great movie, right?
Yeah.
And there is this component of, yes, it's World War II. Yes, there are Nazis. Yes, there's resistance fighters. But the core of that story isn't really about World War II. It's about Rick. It's about the failed relationship, and she's with another man and like trying to, are you going to be good or bad? There's a lot more going on in it than just this World War II thing, which is the backdrop and does impinge upon the story, especially towards the latter half of the movie. But it's just one that you could take Casablanca and you could set it in, like you said, the Civil War. It could be the Civil War in the backdrop, and the fundamentals of the story are not going to change appreciably because it's not about the war. It's about more like, well, not to get artsy, it's about the war inside,
Right. Yeah, and you could argue that a certain extent the movies are like that. It's about the father-son relationship of Vader and Luke and all that stuff. But for the most part, that stuff directly impacts on the war.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's just that's what I enjoyed about the comic strips. But yeah, I'm trying to kind of pinpoint because now I'm like way into like Star Wars, and the original trilogy is my
Mhm.
favorite. The first two movies, just like most other people my age.
Right.
But I'm trying to figure out in my memory like when that happened, because like I said, I saw it as a teenager. I liked it. I didn't go gaga over it. I
Right.
didn't buy any. But at a certain point, like I kind of turned the corner, and like I got like all the movie posters, all these action figures.
Mhm.
I got all the newspaper strips, all this kind of stuff. I got like 5 or 6 Star Wars T-shirts. So at some point, it like turned for me, but it turned for me when
Mhm.
I was in my mid to late 20s.
Right.
So the first Star Wars thing I really got into, where I was like, obsessed with Star Wars, was actually the Phantom Menace,
Mhm.
which is weird because it's not a great movie, but I liked the lightsaber fighting so much
Yeah.
because I was so into Hong Kong fight choreography at the time. I was the kind of guy that would go to Chinatown and try to find bootlegs of Jackie Chan and Jet Li movies,
Right.
that kind of
Right.
thing. So that was kind of the first thing that kind of got me into it. Then Attack of the Clones came out, and without Darth Maul, it's spinning and flipping and doing all his
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
It lost a lot of luster, and those romance scenes didn't help either.
Whew. Yeah.
And
It's tough, man. Like I look at all of the, like, I mean, the original trilogy is always going to be it for me, especially the first two films, and then the Return to Tatooine part of Jedi is like arguably like one of my favorite.
yeah, that's a
I
great
mean,
scene.
it's really great stuff.
It's where it starts becoming a mixed bag instead of just all great stuff.
Yes, definitely. And the prequels and the sequels, they've got all their problems, and we can like kind of touch on some of that. But like those first three movies, incredible, obviously, for me anyway. But the thing is, you have to remember that there's whole generations of people where the Phantom Menace and stuff was the first movies they saw, and they saw them as kids, and they regard them much more highly than you or I might.
Well, my one of my best friends, Monty, he's my age. He's almost a year younger, and he was kind of like me. He just kind of missed Star Wars as a kid. It just
Right.
wasn't. It was around, but it was in the background, and you see the action figures, but they're so wimpy looking compared to like He-Man, which was like all roided out, or
Right.
Superman.
Yeah.
All the figures I had were like roided out, and he's like, these are like proportioned like my dad.
Right.
It's just there's no muscles to speak of.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I get you.
So he kind of discovered him and the prequels he has a soft spot for those prequels. He loves them.
Well, what's interesting is that all right, with the original films, I feel like you can definitely see the influences there. And I'm not saying that it's so much more subtle and it's so much harder to pick out, but because of at the time that I saw them, I was just absorbing Star Wars and didn't really get to analyzing the influences, the visual markers, the things that were borrowed or incorporated from other stuff until much later, right? But then when I watched the prequels, when those came out, I'm not going to say that it was much more obvious, but just for whatever reason, I guess like you're already primed. You're more of an adult. You already kind of know Lucas's approach, the things that he's into. So elements would jump out at me or seem more significant, or it's not that it took me out of the story, but it's like, just as an example, there's a very Ben-Hur component to Phantom Menace. I don't know if you know.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
The
but
chariot scenes
yeah,
and
but you know, the
the pod
chariot
racing.
scenes, yeah, the chariot scene, the pod racing, but also like Anakin's a slave, and you know, the pod racing is like a way to kind of like, you know, achieve freedom from slavery.
Right.
And there's even like a scene where when they're all coming out before the race and they have these flags, and just some of the color coding was very similar to the color coding of the different charioteers in the original Ben-Hur movie, you know.
Right.
And me and you know Bill, so like me and Bill would always joke around like, okay, that was like the Ben-Hur one, and then you know Phantom Menace was kind of like the Wild West one, right?
The Attack of the Clones.
Or no, I'm sorry, yeah, Phantom Menace was the Ben-Hur one. Attack of the Clones was like the Western one, and then
yeah, just the other day someone pointed out, I can't believe I didn't notice it, Django Unchained, Django Fett.
But not just that, but like you see, this is the thing, Count Dooku is like English Bob. He's like the foreign gunfighter from like Europe, and he has like the weird curved like, you know, like handle on his lightsaber, so it looks sort of like a gun handle.
You're yeah, you know about stuff I don't know about.
Yeah, well, you know, and then there's like this whole thing where, you know, it's like, and now, you know, the cowboys have been captured and they're going to be put to death in this trial by combat kind of thing. And there's a lot going on with it that, you know, that's the Western one, you know, and then, you know, Revenge of the Sith is the pirate movie, because it starts off with two ships broadsiding each other. Right. And it literally, it has these big cannons that like spit out the spent shells. And then at one point when they're going through the ship, it lists and turns on its side, so it's hard to navigate the ship. And you know, Anakin's outfit in Revenge of the Sith is very much Errol Flynn, like Captain Blood, you know, like this little like leather kind of vest, and you know, his boots are so there's sort of like there's even a part at one point in the fight on Mustafar, the volcano moon or whatever it is, where the broken off like little anti-gravity thing from one of the buildings breaks, it hits the lava, and it kind of stands up the way like a broken mast on a ship would, and he kind of like hangs onto it and rides it up. So there's very definitely like those influences and those things that Lucas loves, because none of that would surprise me as stuff that like, oh, I love this, I love that, and I want to incorporate this, and I want to incorporate that. So is it just that it's more obvious to me because I'm looking for it, or is it just more obvious because he didn't do as good a job blending all the sources together?
I mean, I didn't know any of that stuff, so I never had heard that before. And I've read and seen a lot of Star Wars stuff.
Well, those are all my own half-assed theories, so whether or not
I don't think you're wrong though. You know, I don't think you're wrong. And there's also kind of like there's the criticism around Jar Jar Binks in the first one was that he was kind of the minstrel, kind of silent movie era. You know, Misa and all that kind of stuff was like taken from that era of.
Which brings us up to the interesting thing though, is the Dark Jar Jar. And would it have been better if Dark Jar Jar actually happened? You know what I'm talking about, right?
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, there's an entire series of videos out there. They're on YouTube. We can link to them or whatever, you know, or put them up on the screen when we like, you know, edit this. But they go through and basically point out that originally Jar Jar was supposed to be evil. See, because here's the thing, like Jar Jar, when they get to the Gungan village and they come in, Jar Jar is actually ahead of the two Jedi, and everyone's backing away from him. Right. And then later on, when he's fighting the you know, the little, you know, the combat droids or whatever they are, like the Roger guys.
Right.
If you actually, and this is funny because you like Hong Kong fight choreography, if you watch his fight moves, because he doesn't actually look like he's fighting, but he's doing this clumsy kind of drunken clown style, like kung fu stuff. And then like later on in the second movie, they show where in Attack of the Clones, he's skulking along. He's got like this posture and this movement that's not at all like Jar Jar, right? And then he turns to the door before the door chime sound actually sounds, because he knows someone's at the door. And then when the door opens up and everyone comes in, then he turns into, oh, Misa, blah, blah, blah. So in any case, there's tons of videos online. You can look at it. I guess like originally it got started with some Reddit, guy did like an entire essay on it or something where he outlined some stuff. I want to say in that whole like, oh, I'm cool, I thought of it too. I want to say me and Bill kicked around that idea because in my mind, it made sense to me because since there's so
Well, I'm
many.
still so you never really explained the theory. So like he's skulking around. What's the theory that he's secretly a Sith Lord or something? Like
Yeah,
what's
well,
the
yeah. Well,
deal?
think about it. I'll just outline some things that me and Bill noticed, and then some things that I think I've read a couple of lists online. But like, okay, when the Trade Federation lands on Naboo, right?
Right.
Where do they land?
Right by Jar Jar.
Right. And the thing is that they're on the side of the planet like opposite from where the actual attack is going to occur. So it's like Jar Jar is like the local contact, like, yeah, land here. And then the
Right.
Jedi are there, and he immediately gloms onto the Jedi, right? They go.
Well, he did cast the vote for Emperor Palpatine to become the Emperor,
right, and then
or to have the emergency powers. So I
right,
just
but
watched Phantom Menace today, so I remember that.
right, but they handcuffed him when he came to his home city because he was quote unquote clumsy. But like what? They never explained what he did. He was clumsy and broke something, or he was clumsy and revealed too much of who and what he was. You know what I mean? Like there's something weird going on because then the whole thing is that like there's
So
a bat.
is this something people kind of think as a joke, or do they think it's a real subtext to the film?
Well, no, think about it. Like there's actual proof now, like when these theories first started circulating online, the guy that played Jar Jar said, I'm glad that people are finally starting to look into this and see that it wasn't just meant to be like this, one-off stupid character. Like they had plans for Jar Jar. I don't think it's ever been officially confirmed. And now, of course, the canon of the series is that this did not happen. But at one point, it was probably meant to be a shocking reveal. Think about it. Like
Right.
This goofy, bumbling, there's a lot of young kids that are watching this for the first time. So he's supposed to be this funny, goofy, lovable, like clown-like character. And then what? In Attack of the Clones, it's revealed that he's actually like a Sith Lord and he's evil because this is the reverse Yoda. Yoda's small and green. Jar Jar is tall and orange. Yoda, has like pointy ears that go out to the side. Jar Jar's got like the long, ears that hang down, but they both would have initially appeared to be these kind of silly, bumbling characters that actually conceal great power, right?
Right.
And the thing is think about the end of the first movie. Qui-Gon's dead. They're burning him, right? And they say, there's always two Sith, right?
Right.
Well, maybe that's true and maybe it's not, because the thing is that like when the shot pans over and you see Palpatine, oh, there's always two Sith, but Jar Jar's standing right fucking next to him. Like,
I just can't imagine like a reveal or Misa, like he's like force choking people. He's got a lightsaber. It's too hilarious.
Think about it. He would stop talking like that. Or if he did, it would be mocking, like, oh, did you think Misa always so stupid? Yeah, I mean, I could see it. I could easily see it, man. Like
it would be so dumb though.
I don't know that it would, because here's the thing, like there's all these other things where like, and so many people have like piled on to point out like different stuff. Like if you really watch closely, the first two, a lot of times when people are talking and saying stuff, Jar Jar's in the background whispering. He's moving his mouth. And he's like saying stuff, and people are saying that he's doing the like Jedi mind trick on these people.
That's funny. Like, I'll have to look into this.
It's so crazy. I mean,
it's very amusing.
Well, yeah, because here's the thing. Like, think about it. Like, they have this plan for this bumbling, funny, lovable character, and the plan is to reveal that he's not harmless, that he's not friendly, that he's not good. And Star Wars has a lot of little life lessons in it, and I could see that being a life lesson. Hey, this guy.
So do you just think they aborted it because
the fan reaction to Jar Jar was so intense that like they had to abort the plan? Like they just like, wow, people really hate this guy. And
They just really failed on two levels. It's like the character design is just so ugly and awful, and then the voice is so obnoxious that, you know, if they had I think that's why, like, to me it seems so stupid, because like
right,
if they had created a character like Yoda that was lovable and
right,
goofy, but
right.
you liked him, but you keep saying lovable,
Mhm.
but Jar Jar's not lovable. He's obnoxious.
No,
If he
I'm
created
not
someone
saying what
actually,
he
then
was. I'm saying what
I
they
think
intended for him to be.
yeah, it could have been pretty interesting. So I just asked people on Facebook, right?
Uh-huh.
Just a couple of my friends, not prequels or sequels, and you said
Right.
prequels, so let's
Yes.
talk sequels now.
Okay.
What do you think? What was your overall impression and feeling about the sequels?
They were just a missed opportunity. They could have really been something special. And I mean, and this is I liked them. I liked every one of them, you know, and there are people that complain about them and bitch and they're not happy or whatever. But I guess for me, like I said, I chose prequels over sequels because
It's funny 'cause I see those as the missed opportunity as well, but
well, Star Wars is littered with missed opportunities, man. I mean, I hate to be like that. I mean, I hate to tell this like, you know, multi-million-dollar making like director who like carved out his whole own fake new mythos or whatever. Like, I'm telling him how he should do his shit, right? So that's hubris right there. But
right,
the thing is that with the prequels, at least that was Lucas's vision. And I'm not
right,
saying that Lucas's vision for the sequels was great because he wanted to do some fantastic planet like shrinking down and going into the
yeah,
bloodstream to hang out with midichlorians or whatever. But the thing is, at least the prequels was Lucas's vision.
okay,
And then there was a progression, you know, there was an actual story that like naturally led from like point A to point B. And I'm not saying that there wasn't a point A, point B like story, but the sequels are just so fundamentally like they're just a regurgitation of like the original three films, and it's disappointing. It's very, I don't know, it's just sad to me, man. Like you know, I can armchair quarterback it all day long about what I think would have been cooler or what I think would have been better or like little tweaks here and there, but I don't. There's so many cool moments, but nothing ever really came together for me. Nothing ever really
yeah. I
gelled.
guess for me it would be like, if you could combine the best of both worlds, because the plot of the prequels and the ambition of the prequels,
Mm,
part of me, like, I do admire that Lucas didn't want to repeat himself in a lot of ways with certain
hmm.
things with the style of the films, but the advantage the sequels have is it looks and feels like Star Wars.
Right.
Other than the lightsabers, the prequels really just the style of the films just looks so different. So, and then like the dialogue of the new films is just that naturalistic, humorous. The jokes actually land in the prequels. The
There's a little
characters
too
have a
much
little.
jokes for me in the sequels. You
Yeah,
know.
yeah, but they actually do, like, the
Yeah.
jokes in the prequels are just like
Oh, they're awful. I know.
awful, awful. So if, I can kind of foresee like if they could combine the best of both worlds. But I see what you're saying about the sequel story. It's one of those things. Like, when Force Awakens came out, it was like a huge hit, and I was one of the people with their arms crossed, like, this is just like the same formula as the
Mhm.
original Star Wars. And then
Yeah.
like everyone's like Kylo Ren is a watered down Darth Vader. Like he just kind of got beat in the first. I just felt like then in that sequel when he betrays who's that weird looking
Snoke.
dude, that's when I was like, hey, they're actually going to do something different. And then he revealed Ray's parents were like nobodies. She
Mm-hmm.
wasn't part of some grand bloodline. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, they're actually doing something different. And
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like that first movie was to set up our expectations that, hey, this is going to be the same old stuff. So I was actually really buying in at that point. I was like, wow,
Yeah.
they're doing something new and different. And then I guess part three was the quote unquote attempt at a course correct. It's kind of, they didn't realize that, like, you can't land this plane anymore. You got to like just roll with,
Fly it into the mountain. Just fly that motherfucker into the
right.
mountain.
Well, that, I guess, there's the duel of fates, the other one that they probably should have ended up going with that, but they try to, like, try to fix it with JJ. Um,
Here's the thing, man. All right.
the crazy thing to me though was that they, before you get us started on your
No, no, no,
subject,
no. Do your thing. Do your thing,
they,
man.
how could they not? They knew they were doing a trilogy. How could they not have the storyline already worked out, for 3 movies. How could they do it installation by installation, especially knowing the success that Marvel has had? And you got to leave some room for improvisation. You got to leave
Right.
some room for spontaneity and creativity. But to have the through line, like who's Ray's parents,
Mm,
clearly that wasn't like set in stone because,
right.
I guess J.J. Abrams, the rumor, I guess, is that he originally envisioned Obi-Wan being her parent or
Right.
whatever.
Right.
In part two, the guys like Rian Johnson were like, we already did the Luke Vader thing. Let's do
Right.
something different. And I actually like that because I kind of like the idea of just anyone can have the Force. You don't have to be part of a special royal
Of
bloodline,
course. Yeah.
you know. And that was kind of at the end. The little slave kids, they had the Force.
That
That
was
was
the
the kind.
moment. Like, you can't see it. The hairs stand up on my arm just talking about that. That was the moment of that film for me. It was
And
like,
I just watched that trilogy with my wife like a couple weeks ago, and I just felt like, you could really just have ended it there. You didn't because like
mhm.
the rebellion goes on, the good versus evil saga goes on. But
God, oh,
and
see,
I
it's giving me chills right now just thinking about that scene, and it's not just that scene, but it's also when they're hiding in the stables and they need help, and it's like the kids, like the poor people, the enslaved people, are the people that are going to help you. You know what I mean? It's like
right,
it's kind of like a grapes of wrath thing. It's like, if you need help, go to the poor.
right,
Because like they don't have anything, but they'll give you everything they have. And it's like,
right.
I don't know, man, like that, those two scenes in that movie like made the entire movie for me. And I liked what they did with it. I liked Ray, her parents being nobodies. I mean, all of that was like rock solid for me. It's like,
I love them killing Snoke because like up until that point, I was not on the Snoke train. I was just like, this guy
mm,
just looks like he's a knockoff of the Emperor, just like Kylo Ren was like a weak version of Vader with the mask and the helmet.
I
This
like
guy's a
that
weak
Kylo Ren's
version.
a weak version of Vader, because he's like this he's this petulant, like shit heel fanboy. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
you
that could work
know,
as like a villain, but not
yeah,
the villain.
yeah,
Desaad has his place, Calabac has his place, but if you want
right.
to land, you need Dark Side, you need
Mm,
the guy. So if Kylo Ren as a side character would be totally good, but as the number one dude, it's just hard to buy him, and that's why they had to bring in Palpatine at the end because like, oh shit,
Well, here's
who
well, here's
can?
the thing, though, man. This is the thing. Everyone's like, "Oh, somehow Palpatine returned." That's the big joke. Everybody focuses on that line from the title crawl of that last movie, like somehow Palpatine returned. And it's like, yeah, but no one had this like issue with like somehow the New Order is the Empire return, and
I
they've got
thought that
another
same
Death
exact thing.
Star.
Like when
It's like,
that's the other thing when Force Awakens came out, I was like, so basically everything that happened in Return of the Jedi, everything that's happened in the first six, this is all for nothing because in 5 minutes the Empire is right back with a new name, and it just felt like our heroes, the heroes that we love that risked everything, were incompetent morons, and that
mhm.
hey, 20 years later they fucked everything up.
I mean, here's the thing, and I know it's easy for me to sit here and spin my webs or whatever, but for me, what should have happened and what would have made more thematic sense with this whole rising and falling action, Lucas is attempting to convey in the prequels how a democratic society falls into fascism, and then the original trilogy is like the battle to like save hope and freedom from like fascism. But then that third trilogy, in my mind, it shouldn't have been that they were fighting like a resurgent like Empire Reborn or the First Order or like neo-Nazis compared to Nazis or whatever, because even in our own history and our own political stuff, like, I'm not saying those guys aren't an issue, but that's like a sideshow. What happened is after World War II, which obviously that's like a big component of Star Wars, after World War II, intelligence agencies of the major powers of the world incorporated the techniques and the beliefs and the approaches and ideas of like the Nazi SS intelligence apparatus. Those people were given they were given passports and visas, and were brought into the bosom of like the extant like world empires at that time, and like we incorporated the germ of fascism, the infection and the virus that we supposedly destroyed. We pulled that into ourselves. I mean, von Braun was a Nazi rocket scientist, and all of a sudden he's helping run our space program. It's
Right.
like, so there's this whole thing where that subsequent sequel trilogy, like, what happens when the good guys are now the power? And do they become, entrenched? Do they become complacent? Do they become corrupted? And
Oh, there's your reason for Luke becoming a hermit.
right. And that would have been a much more interesting story to me, because the other thing is, back when all the theories and everybody analyzing every tiny little detail of everything, because that's what the internet does now. A lot of people made a big deal about that scar on Snoke's face, because that was supposed to be like parallel to the mark where, like, when Luke slashed open Vader's helmet from like the dark side cave on Dagobah.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of noise being made in certain corners of the internet, theory wise, that like somehow Snoke was some sort of like dark side manifestation of like Luke's own like repressed, like anger or whatever. And that would have been a fascinating like development, where like,
one of the big disappointments for Snoke was for me in the first movie, like, he's on that hologram and he's gigantic.
yeah,
I thought he was that big. I thought he
gigantic.
was
Yeah.
gigantic. I was like, wow, this is incredible. Like, they're
Yeah.
doing like something totally different now. There's this gigantic dude, and he's like,
Mhm.
and then when the next movie's, oh, he's just a regular sized guy. Oh,
Yeah.
fucking cares, he's just another old guy. Yeah,
Well, and you're not wrong, because that would have been cool, because in the mythic framework of stuff, how they incorporate these kind of elements of classical myth into Star Wars, it would have been really cool. The heroes fight a giant, like a literal physical giant. But I don't know, man. There was a lot of stuff that I liked. There was a lot of stuff I didn't like. I mean,
So I take it you're kind of like there's multiple seems like the two main the takes on the or the sequel trilogies is that uh Rise of Skywalker was great and they fucked it all up in part 3 by trying to reverse it, or there's the thread line that Rise of Skywalker sucks and that's what fucked up
you mean
the
Last
sequel
Jedi,
trilogy.
right?
Last
or,
Jedi, I'm
or
sorry.
do I have that backwards? I don't know.
No,
That's how bad it
no,
is.
no.
I'm
Last
not
Jedi
even
was the
clear
third
on the
one.
name of the films.
No, which one was it? No,
It was
oh no, Rise
Last
of
Jedi,
Skywalker
and
was the
then
third one.
right, yeah.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that.
No, no.
So either Rise of Skywalker was the best, or
You really
the
like
last,
Rise of Skywalker. That's what I'm getting out
the
of this.
Last Jedi was the best one, or Last Jedi was the one that fucked it up.
I liked Last Jedi. Honestly, the whole scene in the casino and the guy like revealing that, like, see here, the weapons manufacturers, they make X-Wings and they make TIE fighters. It's like,
right.
There was like a certain level of, not realism, but like awareness that was happening as far as like how the machinery of war operates, and the kid, there was just there was a lot that I really enjoyed about it. All the people that want to complain and bitch about like Rose Tycho or whatever her name was and all that, that's stupid, because here's the thing, look, all of these, like, I'm a carnivorous alpha type, He-Man or whatever. Whoever won a war by not destroying what they hate. But that's never been the message of the Star Wars films. Like, did you have your eyes closed and your ears stopped like the whole time you were watching the original?
Right, Luke threw away the lightsaber.
Right,
at the end of Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, it's like, you don't win by like destroying what you hate. You win by saving what you love. And
I have a very dismal view of people. Like, I think if she was like some Asian supermodel with huge cans, they'd love her.
That's absolutely part of it.
I feel like she's I don't know. I have a very low opinion. That's not everyone. There's plenty of normal people that they just may not like any given character, but like the level of vitriol toward her is just like beyond the pale. It's like, okay, she's not like, I'm not going to go out and buy the Rose action figure or anything like that, but she's not like Jar Jar Binks or something.
I'm content with it.
Right. Like I just think, yeah, if she looked like, I don't know, Tia Carrera,
right,
they would have loved her, But see, I'm in that weird category where, I think Last Jedi was the best one. Just like Empire was the best one.
Yeah.
And Revenge of the Sith, to me, it's kind of like Return of the Jedi in that, you could, like Lucas, the plans changed. Originally, it was supposed to just kind of go on for several more sequels. Crap, well, we said there is another. And what I think they should have done is just, instead of making Leia the other, They could have just had like a little epilogue at the end where Luke flies to a planet and finds some little Jedi girl, and he's like,
Right.
"Hey, want to
Right.
start the new Jedi Order with me?"
Mhm.
Or whatever.
Mhm.
Obviously better dialogue than that.
Yeah.
But like for some reason, Lucas felt like, well, let's just make Leia the. You could just tell there's some rush decisions. We got to land this plane now. I was going to land it in 4 more films. Now I'm going to land this film
Right.
in this next film. I think that's kind of what happened with Rise of Skywalker. But like to me, it's like not a wholly bad movie. It's like it's still got it's all the Star Wars movies. I just watched Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones today, and it's weird with those movies. Sometimes I turn them on, and like the last time I tried to watch Phantom Menace, I turned it off like 20 or 30 minutes. I was like, I can't take this. This
Right.
is so fucking boring. They make Star Wars. Today I watched them. I was like, it did its job. It's fun enough. It's not
Yeah.
perfect, but
Yeah.
there's more good than bad. I can. I like the lightsabers. I like the special effects. I like kind of seeing the guys run around. Like, it doesn't have to be an
Yeah.
A+ every time.
And and it's not gonna be. I mean, like, here's the thing. Like, I liken it to, if you go all the way back to like oral tradition times, do you think that like everybody liked every installment of the Odyssey?
Right,
Do you
right.
think that everybody liked every island they landed on in Jason and the Argonauts? I mean, it's just one of those things. It's like, storytellers, learn by a process of trial and error. And it's just
Yeah.
that now, like, what do you really lose if you tell a less than stellar story to a bunch of people crowded around a campfire outside of your cave? You might not eat that night. I don't know. But like now,
You could tell the story 2 weeks later and make it better.
right, exactly. But now it's like when you invest like, $40 kajillion and like all of these like hundreds of man hours and, CGI, like special effects time, the stakes are so high.
Well, that's kind of one thing that's unfortunate to me too. It's like, and it's got to be like the movie. Like when I see the prequels, like, it's too bad, because Lucas, like he had to tweak the original trilogy. It's like, it's too bad he can't just go in there. And you see Lucas too. Like there's this one revealing clip of him, like they kind of filmed him writing the scripts and making the movie, and they did the first cut of the movie, and he's just like, oh, that was a lot. Like he just watched, you talking about the 4, like there's 4 different storylines going on in the climax. Somebody's like, oh, and the problem is if you take any of them out, the other parts don't work. So, and you could kind of see in his face and the way he's like, oh man, I put myself in a corner, but this movie's already made. There's no way out of this. So this is what we have, and you could tell it's too bad that he can't, just be like, hey, version 2 guys, sorry. I know I didn't land the plane, but we all love these Star Wars movies and I'm going to try again, and it's just a shame it can't be like that, like, hey, let's just try again. Let's just do it again.
If anyone had the money to do it, it's him. But there's pressures, there's marketing, there's toys being made. I mean, it's like there's this entire avalanche of like surrounding events beyond just the film.
Right,
and
right.
it's like,
and that's the thing too, is like, to me, like Disney, they have all like, oh, we don't know what to do with like Star Wars, they're doing the TV shows. It's like the prequels are the ones that are really the ripest for remaking, because you've already got a storyline that's already set that people expect. You just got to tell it. You could tell, I mean, that's the thing. Like, well, for me, the prequels, I know there are like plot holes and all this stuff, but there are plot holes in the regular Star Wars movies. No one cares. If you just make it look like Star Wars, better dialogue, you could just refilm those movies and like make it like visually consistent with the original trilogy. That's a home run. But because it would be seen as this huge slap in the face to Lucas if they did it. I don't think we'll see it. Maybe toward the end of our lifetimes when Lucas is departed for become one with the Force himself. But then we might see it. But who knows? But,
I'm sorry. That tickled me. Don't mind me. Nothing against Lucas. I don't think too ill of the man. I just,
Oh, I like the guy. I mean, the guy's I find that guy very relatable. He's just trying I see him as a guy. He's just trying his best. What is his great crime? He made some movies people don't like. It's not like the guy's out there murdering people or something.
Yeah. He just murdered his own creation. That's all.
I mean, still, it's funny.
But hey,
it's
Frankenstein
one of those
did
things.
that.
Well, I was just gonna say earlier, and I watched Letters to Iwo Jima and like several other movies. Beautiful, like they incredibly moving, but I've never watched them again.
Right.
I must have seen those prequel movies like 10 times each by now.
Right.
And I don't even think they're good, but there's something that keeps pulling me back in. Like I'm gonna watch it again. Well, even my wife today was like, "What?" She's like, "Oh, you're watching the bad ones,
Yeah, but it's like, there's not a whole lot else like it, and that's the thing, like, I mean,
That's kind of what I was getting at earlier with Battlestar Galactica. Like,
Yeah.
why isn't there more Star Wars out there other than Star Wars?
Well, I mean, well, because for one, if you do anything that's too close to it, of course you get accused of ripping it off, but like the thing is that like if we could just accept that like this that Star Wars was sort of the foundational epic of what is essentially if not necessarily new, a very specialized genre of storytelling, which is essentially space fantasy. It is sword and planet in its way. There's going to be a mixture of swords and laser guns and monsters and spaceships and that kind of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe like aesthetic of combining like low-tech medieval barbarism against like ancient technologies and giant spaceships and stuff like that. If you could just accept that that's like a foundational thing and that people just want to use that aesthetic to tell a variety of all different kinds of stories, there could be more of that. But the problem is that you're accused of ripping it off, and then also anything that you make, well, it wasn't as good as Star Wars, so I mean,
yeah, but then you look at superheroes. I mean, you think it's kind of like,
I'm sick to death of superheroes. Can I just say that out loud now? I'm
sure.
finally at that
a lot
point.
of people are now. I'll never get tired. But it's kind of funny. You saying that Star Wars thing kind of reminds me. There's this column in the Jack Kirby Collector called Kirby as a Genre, and it's usually about like people incorporating his like visual themes and some of his. But I just think, like his work is so distinct. It is almost like a genre unto itself, and you got guys like Tom Scholey working within that genre, and you can kind of see Star Wars has its own genre in a way. The lightsabers and like that kind of particular type of space epic, because even when you don't fully rip it off, like, I mean, we think about Battlestar Galactica, there's a lot about it that's not really right from Star Wars, but because they took the aesthetic. I think that Ralph McQuarrie aesthetic is the key thing, and the lightsabers.
Well, I mean, I just, the TV shows, obviously, like, there's a lot of the TV shows that I haven't even consumed. Like I barely remember the CGI, like Clone Wars. I guess you don't really even call it a cartoon, although I guess that's what it is.
Animated series, I think is what.
But there were also some like, I remember some pretty cool like like Bruce Timm / Samurai Jack like style like animated shorts that they did for a while, and like
I have those on DVD.
Yeah, I enjoyed
the
those.
original Clone Wars DVD
right.
Minis. They called it a micro series. They were like 15-minute episodes or something.
Yeah, and those were fun. I recall those, and the Mandalorian, obviously that's like one of the big champs, and then other people have been really enjoying the Andor series, and like the Andor series could have almost been like not even Star Wars if you just changed a few.
I haven't seen it yet.
Well, I won't spoil anything for you, but I just really feel like you could have almost like weeded out just like certain lines, certain references, changed up the visual aesthetic just slightly, and it would have worked great as just a science fiction, kind of story outside of the Star Wars universe entirely. But the thing is, I almost feel like they went so hot on the heels of Mandalorian with the Boba Fett thing, and for me, the Boba Fett thing was a big misfire. Like,
really, I haven't seen that one yet. You can talk about it, but I haven't seen it yet. Just
here's the thing. Like, obviously people like Boba Fett. Boba Fett's cool. Inexplicably for some reason, because he doesn't do a whole lot and he screws up a good bit. But people like Boba Fett. So
visual.
Yeah, absolutely.
Never underestimate it.
But then there were some really cool components of it, but just overall, I mean, there was just so many different things in the Boba Fett series that I like. We've got like an evil Wookiee, and you got like a Twi'lek madam running a brothel, and you've got like the sand people or whatever, and Boba Fett hanging out with them and having like a vision quest, and there was a very Old West vibe to a lot of it that I enjoyed, but somehow just, again, sometimes things just don't come together for whatever reason. It is interesting
that, because that's kind of like the mystery to me, because I've watched the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian, and probably the next one I'm going to watch is the Boba Fett show. And it's just like, and I already know that the Boba Fett didn't get the reception the Mandalorian did. And I just feel like, gosh, how's that possible? Because the second season of Mandalorian ended so strong with Boba Fett. And it kind of left me like feeling like, hey, man, I was actually in the same boat with you. I was like, Boba Fett's the guy that got killed by a blind-eyed Han Solo. Man, he
Yeah.
seems like he's the Jar Jar Binks of the original trilogy.
Yeah.
But like,
It's all an empire, because the whole thing is like he was crafty. They dumped the space junk. Han's so clever. We're just gonna float
well,
away with the
from what I
garbage.
understand, and we'll loop around, but all I
Yeah.
was gonna say was they actually got me intrigued by Boba Fett. I was like,
Right.
I'm actually want to watch this Boba Fett show now. But the thing, well, from back to what you were saying was like, and I've talked to people. I'm like, so what is the deal? Why Boba Fett? Because they love Boba Fett. Like
Yeah.
one of the guys we know, Brian, and I'm on one of the Brians. He's way into it. It's just like before Star Wars came out. And you're just dying for more Star Wars. Oh, I can't wait for the next Star Wars. I need the next Star Wars. And then you had the holiday special with the animated Boba Fett thing, which you can watch on Disney Plus. And you just saw him, there's the action figure. You just got this feeling this character is going to be the next Darth Vader, next huge Star Wars character. He's going to be a big part of, and not like, watching Empire now, I'm like, he's barely in it,
Well, oddly, going back to Lucas's wife saving things, at one point the plan was for him to be Darth Vader's brother, and Lucas's wife was like, that ties things much too closely together. He needs to just be a separate character.
Wow, that would have been a misfire.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's hard to overestimate, the importance of Lucas's wife as like a guiding, presence in those early movies.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think creative people, you get so into it. You were talking earlier about how like it's like a Ben. I wouldn't be surprised if part of the reason that there's so many weird, there's that weird pacing in the prequel trilogies. There's the weird, like it's like him shoehorning all these cinematic references and fan service to himself. I wouldn't be surprised, like that whole pod race thing. Like when I'm watching Star Wars, not knowing the Ben-Hur thing, I'm just like, why is this scene in this movie like? You're on the planet, get the kid, and like, why have this extensive pod racing scene? Like, I just didn't even get it. Like who cares about this? And now, like when you said Ben-Hur, I'm like, oh, okay.
Right.
Now I understand why he put that in there.
But the thing is young Anakin, like Anakin as a kid, was just a complete mistake to me from the get-go. He should have been.
Oh yeah, what's funny is like Patton Oswalt has this great bit on it. And I hate to do this because he tells it so much better like on a podcast, but like,
right.
But anyway, he was talking about the prequels, and he's just like, you're so excited about the prequels coming out. You'd be like, oh man, we're gonna have Darth Vader. Darth Vader's in this movie. He's like, oh yeah, that's right, Vader's in this movie. And guess what? You're gonna see him as a little kid. What? Yeah. He's gonna be a little kid. Oh, you mean he's kind of like a little Damien kind of kid, like killing people with his mind? Right. No, he's just a little kid. And then they take him from his mother, and he's very sad. Oh, okay. Well, what about the second one? Oh, well, in the second one, we'll be bringing in Boba Fett. Oh, Boba Fett, that's awesome. Yeah, I love Boba Fett. He's like, he's killing people with the flamethrower. And no, he's just a little kid. And then his father dies, and he's very sad.
Oh my God!
But guess what?
That's it.
But guess what? In part 3, we're going to see the Death Star. Oh, the Death Star. Oh, that Death Star is so great. We're going to see it blowing up planets. Oh, no, we're just going to see the plans.
It's a little kid.
And then Vader will be very sad.
Oh my God, dude. Yeah.
It's funny. It's like, he's like, and then he kind of did this whole bit. It's like, I'm surprised we didn't see like young Han Solo in a little vest, like running around in part 3, the way things are going.
Yeah. It's just, I don't know, man. I mean, and the thing is, it's like, you love something, and when you love something, you do legitimately want it to be great. I mean, I'm a Gen X kid, so there was always like a component of like taking the piss out of things and like running down shit, even if you loved it. But like ultimately at the heart of it, there's still love. You know what I mean? There's still like this genuine affection for something and wanting it to like be everything that it could be. And there were just some inexplicable choices made. And
yeah, it's funny though, the world we live in now. It's kind of like, you hear about people complaining about like how many superhero movies there are, and
yeah, like
people of our but yeah, and that's fine. I totally get that, but like I just remember like being fucking amped for Batman Forever because Robin was gonna be in it.
Right.
I lived in a world where like, oh, Robin's in a movie. Holy shit!
Right.
Like that's how dry the superhero movie world was growing up. So to me, it's like I always feel like remembering myself when I was a kid, just wishing that I just would love if there was a Spider-Man movie where he was like the spider, like crawling on the walls and spinning around.
Mhm.
Now there's like half a dozen movies where Spider-Man's doing that, more than half a dozen
Yeah.
Spider-Man movies. And it's just like, I don't want to forget that. And I just remember like with I remember I wasn't way into Star Wars, but I had a group of friends that was way into Star Wars, and they were
Mhm.
just dying for those prequel movies. And they just felt like it was never going to happen. Like Star Wars
Yeah.
was over. Oh, this was like 90, 93, 94. Oh, like they read the novels and all that other stuff. And, but there's, in their heart of hearts. Oh, and like when the prequels were announced, we started seeing the commercials. I was living somewhere else. Those guys were in Panama.
Right.
My dad was in the service, and their dads were in the service. And then I was in Maryland when the prequels actually came out.
Mhm.
Actually, I was in New York City, and I just remember back. I wish I could be around them now, just to see the
Right.
excitement on their faces and hear them talk about
Watch
how.
them go
And,
ape shit.
all right, and now we live in a world where there's like 80 million. There's like so many Star Wars. There's like what 7 or 8 more Star Wars movies. There's
Yeah.
all these TV series like Could you imagine a show like The Mandalorian when you were a kid
Oh,
being
no.
on TV?
Oh my
Of course, like,
God.
all the show. That's the thing. I watched the
I'd have been
like
like foaming at
Hawkeye.
the mouth.
They're all like, but they all have movie quality. It's like you remember when Battlestar Galactica, you watch Battlestar Galactica, be like, oh, it's like Star Wars, but it's kind of like a poor man's Star Wars. But
Yeah.
like the TV shows now, a lot of them have effects and acting, just
Yeah.
and cinematics is
When mom
just as
said we
good
have
as,
Star Wars at home.
but now we really do.
Yeah. Because here's the thing. Ultimately, in the long run, I like those prequels. I even like the sequels, right? And there's things that I'm going to have problems with, but especially in terms of the prequels, because you watch these movies and it was built into the DNA of the films that there was a story before that you were not really privy to. And so
Right.
your brain extrapolates from all these little clues and all these ideas or whatever. And if you're even halfway a creative person, like those prequels were never going to be as good as whatever it was you imagined.
Oh yeah.
There was just
You're
no
talking
way.
like 20 years, 1977 to 1998.
Right.
Just anticipation. What was Darth Vader like when he was Anakin?
Mhm.
What did he look like? What did he sound like? What
Mhm.
like him and Obi-Wan going on adventures together? Like you're
Yep.
just it's kind of one of those things, like where the vague idea of it. Yeah, you don't even have concrete ideas. You have vague ideas of it, but
Mhm.
they're so powerful. And then
Well, that's because they have this mythic quality to it. It's like it's really in another form. It's the same thing as watching a trailer for a movie. They're going to cut out those best moments and those things that are going to draw you in, and you watch it and your brain tries to imagine, well, what if it looks this awesome? What's the rest of the movie going to be like?
right.
And and it's like the trailer for Prometheus. It looked awesome and Prometheus was meh,
Yeah.
and that's just the way it is, unfortunately.
I guess we could kind of talk a little bit about, and you're obviously leaving yourself open for criticism when you say like, here's what I would have done. But you know what? We're having fun.
Yeah.
Why not have a little fun? Because how did you? Because it's not just that like how did this story unfold, but it's like we didn't really have a lot of conceptions about like what the Jedi Knights were like, like
Right.
what did they wear, because like they were kind of like monk like when Lucas brought them back. They couldn't have wives, they didn't, and obviously none of that stuff was known or maybe didn't even exist since in the Tim Zahn novels, for example. There's Mara Jade and Luke
Mhm.
gets married and has a kid and everything, so
Mhm.
clearly that wasn't. I kind of saw them as like Knights of the Round Table types,
Yes. Yeah. Definitely something a little more Arthurian, or like it would not have been inappropriate for them to like have some kind of round table or something. And you have these Jedi Knights, and yes, they go through training, and yes, they have to be initiated into their powers and stuff, but yeah, the monkish element always seems strange to me, because the other thing that doesn't really make sense to me is that if force abilities are inheritable and they are passed through bloodlines,
yeah,
it's like if you're not allowed to have sex or like emotional attachment. So is there some kind of weird Jedi breeding program where like show up, put a bag over your head, have sex with this chick, and let's hope the kid has force powers?
Some
Like,
chicks like, I can tell that this is Yoda.
Right,
Put the bag on that.
right.
Oh god, it's the weird green guy.
Right, but like but in my mind, it's like, so what? How is it? And I get it. It's a galaxy populated with like trillions and quadrillions of beings. So presumably the Force just keeps making more people with the powers. But if it is inheritable, it just seems strange. Like, we're gonna keep you from producing more people with the Force. You know, it was just
Yeah,
strange to me.
well, and also like I guess even though like it's thin, but like in the original movie, it was like, oh, your father was a Jedi, and it wasn't like, oh, your father was a scandalous, he had a kid and he
Right.
was a Jedi Knight. It was just like it seemed like kind of a normal. It felt like a very normal thing that a Jedi Knight would do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think like I don't think my thoughts about how a prequel trilogy would have gone are too different from other people's. I think you kind of think you didn't really need to meet Anakin as a kid. You kind of get rid of Phantom Menace. You start with like I kind of if they could have made like the first one a little more of like the first Star Wars, where it was just a classic adventure, really build up that like Obi-Wan, Anakin. Like Anakin should be like, to me, incredibly likable. Almost like Han Solo-ish. I was just thinking like when I was watching Attack of the Clones, there's those kind of awkward, creepy lines, like when
Yeah.
he's like trying to. But it's like, what? If a cocky Harrison Ford type
Mm-hmm.
could like read these lines and make them work, instead of being like weirdly cocky, it would just be like, oh, this guy's just just a charming,
A little more
real.
devil may care, a little
So
more like rebellious,
right, just
like,
like a little more fun and
yeah.
not such so angsty. I think that it becomes more sad when he turns to the dark side if he's seen as so you just kind of the classic like him and Obi-Wan, it really built up that friendship. There's almost like a Starsky and Hutch, Riggs and
Mm-hmm.
Murtaugh feel between the two. You're
Mm-hmm.
loving seeing them together. Um, and then part two is like Revenge of the Sith, where he betrays them, and then part three is like him hunting the Jedi, and you can almost kind of see that.
Yeah, I
With
really
some of
felt
the
robbed. Like, I mean, it was interesting in its way, General Order 66 or whatever. But the thing is after Attack of the Clones, like, okay, I've been good. I've taken my medicine. And now this third film, I'm gonna get what I've been waiting for. And I was expecting like he's gonna betray the Jedi Order, and it was gonna be like him hunting him down. There was gonna be like badass fight scenes of him like whacking off like the top half of that chrome dome dude's head.
you said whacking off.
Like, I mean, like there's just gonna be like some crazy
Yeah,
stuff. Like,
you kind of were. I was thinking we half the movie he'd be in the Darth Vader suit.
yeah, or whatever. Like I can even handle the whole thing of like he doesn't get the suit. I like that moment. I like that at the end and he's crippled and he's messed up and and they like I can handle all that. Like even right down to the whole stupid no or what
Right.
that's fine. But I really expected there to be a lot more him massacring and killing Jedis and like hunting them down and just like and like even like scenes maybe not with like a whole lot of emotional intensity, but him showing up and someone like they turn around and they just look at him and they know, like, wait a minute, like you're evil now, and like boom, the lightsabers come on and there's like a fight because like the nature of the Force is you can sense these things, this like emotional like resonance or whatever,
Right.
to where like once like just popping up on a planet, like what are you doing here? Oh, so and so sent me. And like realizing that it's a lie and like trying to get the
Right.
drop on them, like kind of some tense sort of cat and mouse sort of stuff, like hunting and pursuing people through like different weird environments. And I don't know.
I mean, in actuality, too, you could even start the prequel trilogy with Revenge, because that's the problem with the prequel trilogy is it's building up to the story whose end we already know.
Right.
We know Darth Vader's going to turn.
Yep.
We know he's going to yada yada. So if you put all that stuff in the first prequel movie,
Oh yeah.
and just get it out of the way, then you leave like these two movies where like anything could, other than like Darth Vader and Obi-Wan dying,
Yeah.
anything else could happen.
I mean, personally, I kind of love it. You were talking about the Patton Oswalt like routine or whatever, but the idea of like a little omen child like Darth Vader, I would have been fine with that, like, and like maybe he's not completely corrupt or evil like right off the bat, but just like having these like moments where like he gets really mad at someone and then like something bad happens, like he's staring at him and he's pissed off, and then like a pile of junk falls down and crushes Watto or whatever. Like, like, I
Right.
mean, some ominous moments, because there wasn't really enough of that ominousness in the first film. He's sweet, he's likable, he's cute, or whatever. And the second film, they age him up real fast. The whole weird age disconnect between him and Padme is like strange, and if not necessarily inappropriate, then like just a little off-putting.
I don't even understand why Lucas made that choice.
Yeah. And then, like I could have even seen something along the lines of like him and Padme are in a relationship and maybe even the kids are about to be born or something. And like perhaps he was, because at one point in one of the books or an article that I read, they mentioned that there was not a confusion, but like there's sort of a choice to be made where like, oh, maybe the next like Sith will be like a female, and like whether she would be like sort of like a beautiful vampiress, like kind of, Sith, or if she
Right.
would be like creepy and spider-like and twitchy. And instead they went with Dooku, but I could have even seen like some sort of evil, beautiful Sith, and like Anakin is literally seduced, like
Right.
just something that would kind of.
Yeah, that's actually another one of the things I thought was a misstep. Like, why does there only two? Like why not have all these badass Sith lords fighting all these like who wants to see the Jedi take on those Roger guys?
Yeah.
Like
I
who
don't know.
cares?
I
Like
don't
why
know.
not have like a bunch of badass red lightsaber having dudes?
Mhm.
Like the Knights of Ren or whatever in the
Right.
you
Yeah.
got your like crew of like badasses. Like I just kind of didn't get that, but
So you've seen the first couple seasons of Mandalorian, but you haven't seen the Boba Fett one, and so I'm going to assume you haven't seen the Obi-Wan
I
one.
did see the Obi-Wan was the first. Obi-Wan is my favorite Star Wars character, him or Yoda.
Well,
So
but the
that was the
thing
first
is
one I
so
watched.
if you've seen the Obi-Wan series, like those guys, like these,
Oh
like
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. Those guys are awesome.
right,
Well,
like
that's the thing too,
them.
is like you kind of like what I was gonna say earlier is you could almost make like a prequel trilogy of your own in a sense that like
Oh
you
yeah.
could start with Revenge of the Sith,
Hmm.
you could go move on to the Obi-Wan miniseries, and then you could have Rogue One as your
Yep.
lead in to, and that could
Yep.
be like a perfectly viable.
And there's going to be that. There's tons of that. There's fan edits every which way but loose. You know what I
There's
mean?
some good ones too that really improve this
Yeah.
prequel trilogy.
And
Oh, let's say now kind of watching the prequels. Let's say we talked earlier about like you could just kind of take the same story. You wouldn't even have to change anything, and just better directing and better aesthetics. Watching the movies today, I thought there's some scenes in these that like in a better storyteller's hands could be gut wrenching. Like you have slave, this little child who's a
mm-hmm.
slave,
Mm-hmm.
and he's leaving his mother, who he's leaving her to continue being a slave
Yep.
to go off to this better life. That could be like,
Yeah.
the waterworks are falling, Qui-Gon Jinn's killed, like there's certain I just thought like gosh, and then Luke, I mean, how sad, like when I was watching Anakin carry his mother's body,
Mm-hmm.
I should be feeling so much more for him in this moment
Yeah.
than I do,
Yeah.
like it just felt like there were, even within the story that was there were like a lot of missed opportunities just from like a storytelling perspective.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem is that there isn't like I always have, this is the thing, because hindsight is 2020 and because so much of what we're discussing you have to look at it retroactively. I always have to ask
Yeah.
myself, like, do I not perceive, like, was there really no emotional resonance to the original stuff that I watched and I was just a kid, so it seems like there's emotional resonance? Or, is it just that like these other creations are just like subpar enough that like you just don't get that emotional connection to these characters because it just isn't there. It's not just that I'm old and I'm
I
dated,
don't
it's
think
just
it is.
not there,
I think that's a very intelligent thing to do, is to like, hey, we know that the way our brains are designed, the things that you experience before the age of 20 or 21, whatever it is, are going to be more intense to you. But the thing is, Star Wars was a huge phenomenon when it came out, like redefined the movie industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it wasn't just because it appealed to kids. It wasn't like The Last Unicorn or something. There were grown people, teenagers of all ages, who just loved going to Star Wars. I remember reading Russ Manning loved Star Wars. He felt like it
Right.
was bringing back the Flash Gordon stuff he loved as a kid. That's what
Mm-hmm.
Lucas was trying to kind of do at the time. So I don't think it's just nostalgia. I think they're just legitimately better movies than the
Yeah.
prequel trilogies. And it's not like I shouldn't even have to say that, because it's not like those are, it's a lot of movies that are better than the prequel
Yeah.
movies, nostalgia or
Yeah.
not. So, I mean, those original Star Wars, I think, especially for their time, it's just they really were so different than any other science fiction movie or any other movie. Just the music, the aesthetic, and that Jedi mythology. They really just kind of
There,
tapped into the zeitgeist.
what is not there in almost all of the other films for me is this sense of like, and I'll just jump to a completely other series of movies here, but like think about like what is it in like Lord of the Rings, where like Galadriel, like they meet her and there's like the weird mental communication, or she's talking and she says that like the fellowship is failing, things stand on a knife edge, and
Right.
if actions are not taken, like everything will fall into shadow. See, like the hair stand up my arm again. And it's like, the thing is that for me is that there was this sensation of like the precariousness of everything in those original movies. Like
Right.
everything's riding on this, like everything that we've hoped and prayed for is like falling apart. And I don't know. I just don't get that vibe. Like, especially the prequels should be this idea of like our shining golden
Camelot is
society.
falling.
Yeah, Camelot is falling, and we're like watching it happen, but you don't ever feel like this, sensation of like the tragedy of it.
Well, that's the thing. Like, you should be like, that's what I mean when I said earlier, like how like we should be like loving Anakin and like begging, he's gonna turn, but no, don't do it, don't do
Right,
it, don't do it. You never feel that, and I- I'll say one thing. I've never cried at a Star Wars movie,
right.
but the closest I've ever come to where I actually feel like
Mhm,
emotion welling up me, and this might sound weird, but it's the scene where at the end of the original Star Wars, when
mhm,
Han Solo comes out of nowhere
mhm.
to save Luke from the Vader's
Yeah,
closing in.
yeah, yeah.
It gets me like almost choked up a bit because it reminds me of the only thing that gets me to get emotional or cry every time is the end of any telling of A Christmas Carol, when Ebenezer Scrooge at the end
Right,
changes. I don't know
right.
what it is about it, but like when he changes and he's goes to tiny, like all that stuff just gets me so like emotional. I just watched the Bill Murray version this last Christmas,
Right.
and I'm like fighting back tears like every time. And that's like kind of the same transformation. Han Solo, he people can change, people can be a better version of themselves,
Hmm.
and that's
Hmm.
like the only time I felt that level of emotion. But when you think about everything that happens in the prequel trilogy, the cataclysmic events, it's like you should be feeling like things like through every single one of those films.
Yeah.
Camelot's falling, a slave boy is leaving behind his mother who's a slave. They never went back for her. Now she died because they never went back for her.
Hmm.
He's so good. He's got the potential to be the best, but his heart is so broken that
Yeah.
he's becoming evil. I mean,
Yeah.
like we
He's
should.
twisted up inside.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, like just talking about like these plot points, these,
Hmm.
like is getting me a little more emotional than the movies themselves get me, because I
Yeah.
just feel like the movies are so bogged down in I don't know, like bad dialogue
Well,
or weird
yeah,
pacing or
there's
something.
bad dialogue, there's bad pacing, they're prisoners of their own dogma. Like there's this need to where like the original films created a mythology and a lore like almost effortlessly, because so much of it was just broadly sketched and like roughly painted in, and your imagination had to fill in all the cracks. And then they could have done the same thing with the prequels, but there's like this, it's that fanboyish need to fill in like every little detail and every little
The
thing.
official handbook of the
Yeah,
Marvel universe.
right. And just make sure that everything is connected and everything, like every little detail. Like not everyone needs to have some crazy backstory. Not everybody has to have like some detailed connection with like another character. It's like people move in and out of each other's lives in the real world all the time.
Right, right.
Like
But it's funny that you say that vaguely. It's kind of like when you hear about like I fought with your father in the Clone Wars, and you're like, oh, what's that? Clone Wars.
right.
Oh, that's what. And then you see the Clone Wars. No, it's just a bunch of
Yeah.
like Roger guys fighting a bunch
I
of like
know.
clone stormtroopers. Who
I
cares?
know.
Like it's
Yeah.
so like not exotic. When you hear Clone Wars, you think, oh, they're creating clones of all these people. You can't trust anyone because they could be a
Right.
clone, and then and it's
Yes.
just like it's a shadow war between clones and real people. Your
Right.
mind just can go anywhere with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
That's
like when
and that's absolutely where I wanted it to be, was more so like kind of like an invasion of the body snatchers style, like Civil War, where like, and then people would die and then they're just brought back. And is it the real
right,
person? Is it live? Is it Memorex? Like
right.
whatever. And but yeah, the another thing is, and I know that you know perhaps it's been overdone too much, like especially after the event itself, but it's almost like those prequels and the Camelot, the fall of Camelot kind of thing that we're discussing. It almost needed like a kind of like a 9/11 moment, something where some symbolic representation of like the purity and the justice, or like the like the equity that they were like fighting for, and just to watch it like destroyed and brought into ruin. And then like not that it's not, I was going to say, not that it's some kind of great like comparable film, but like think about how the Na'vi or whatever reacted when like their big mother tree or whatever was like destroyed in Avatar. Like there was never anything like that in those prequels. There was never this sense of like, this is a moment that we cannot go back to. We cannot like
nothing will ever be the same from this moment on. It's you kind of reminded me, like there was this the most popular series of videos on YouTube, like kind of dissecting and goofing on the prequels. One of the things it mentioned was like, throughout the, there's these Clone Wars, it's creating havoc, but like you look at Coruscant, it doesn't look like a war's going, and everyone's just there's no like, we should be seeing like in the first Star Wars in the Phantom Menace, like he was pointing out, it's a beautiful city. Then by the Revenge of the Sith, it should be like, just beat the shit because of all the war, like
people rioting in the streets,
right? People, there's no food, people are destitute, like the time, it just seems like nothing's happening. Although I think that was probably part of Lucas's plan about how, in America we were fine, but all the wars are overseas, so we never feel it,
But it would have also been more realistic, because that's what happens. Like fascism rises in times of uncertainty and trouble, where like there's civil unrest, there's like disruptions to supply chains, like the old institutions that we used to have faith in, we can't rely upon them anymore. And then the strong man comes in and says that, well, I'm going to fix all this. I'm going to bring you order, and you didn't get that. Like, I mean, even in Attack of the Clones, which you just watched recently, here's the thing. When they have to get out of Coruscant because of the assassination attempt on Amidala, they say, we'll go back to Naboo. We'll disguise ourselves as refugees. And I'm like, refugees from what? Who's leaving?
The diner, the diner,
right? Yeah, like I mean, who's leaving Coruscant right now? What? There's
the quiet library there where Obi-Wan's browsing books.
Yeah, right. Refugees. Like, what are you talking about?
One of the funniest things someone pointed out about Attack of the Clones was like, there's that woman who is the assassin, and she's got that mask, and then at the end she's killed and she's revealed to be a shapeshifter. So it's like, why were you wearing that mask to begin? Like, what if you're a shapeshifter? Like, what was the point of that?
Right.
And you weren't. But what's funny was I don't want this to turn into like a total like.
I'm not trying to bag on it. It's just that we're talking about like something that we wanted to be great, and it could have been like everything was there.
I know I think that's why it's so hard to give up talking about those movies. It's like there's 20 years of anticipation. It's like there's that famous Super Bowl that the Titans lost. I know you don't really care.
Yeah.
But like basically the Titans lost. The guy, as the time was expiring, he stretched out to get over the goal line, and it would have won them the game. But he was like literally like a foot short. He got tackled a foot short before the game, and the Titans have never won a Super Bowl. That was their closest they like ever got to it, and they were a foot short.
Better to miss by a mile than to miss by a foot.
Right, exactly. Like that's the thing. Like if your team sucks that year, you don't even care about it. But if you get to the Super Bowl and you barely lose, you just think, oh, what could have been? So that's what the prequels are. It's like he got to the 1 yard line and then he fumbled the ball.
Yeah, and I don't.
But anyway, what I wanted to say was let's talk about some of the Star Wars stuff we do. Like one of the rare, unadulterated, universally loved things since Empire Strikes Back, The Mandalorian. That's kind of crazy to me that it probably wasn't something Disney. Disney poured all this money into the sequel trilogy. It's got the lightsabers. It's got the Skywalkers. It's got the original cast back and all that other stuff. And I don't think it's but it's just not what it's not what it could have been. It's kind of like it's like the prequels in that way. It could have been.
But it's just great, it's this mishmash. It's this shit show that keeps going back and forth and like retconning itself. It's like,
meanwhile, Jon Favreau.
Yeah, Jon Favreau.
Like, let's just do like a Western show with like, I guess, basically Boba Fett. But Boba Fett's got a little too much baggage, so I'm just gonna make a new Boba Fett.
But that's what worked about it. This is the thing. It stripped it down. It brought it back to its roots. It had a more I won't say minimal cast, because there's a lot of characters like going in and out, but pulling it pulled it back from like a galactic scope to like a smaller kind of story. And honestly, after like all of the huge space battles and planets blowing up and like dogfights or whatever, it's like that's kind of what needed to happen.
Well, it
And
just made me wonder, the thing about, the original source material, Flash Gordon, there were a lot of things that influenced it, right?
mhm,
But Flash Gordon was a comic strip, which is a serial. And then
mhm,
in the theaters, it was like 12-part serials, 12 episode serials, essentially.
yep,
And now we're at a point where they're not really, I know they're in development. There's a lot of Star Wars movies in development, but I haven't seen a trailer yet for anything since, Han
right,
Solo's movie. But they're pumping out the, Ahsoka Tano, whatever her name is, she's going to get a
mhm,
series. They got the new one now, Andor. There's Boba Fett. There's another season of Mandalorian coming next month.
mhm,
It's like the TV series are where it's at, and it's like you're saying, one of the things that I really like about, as much as I love the original trilogy, I think I like the original Star Trek series more because of its episodic nature. It could have those quiet episodes.
yeah,
They're really epic episodes, like where the Romulans was that one where the Romulans they're in
Balance
the
of
neutral
Terror,
zone. Yeah, like that. That's like that could be a movie.
yeah,
But it's also got those smaller character focused ones, and that's what you see with Mandalorian. And I'm just like, gosh. And I think back to the comic strips that Russ Manning did, where you could just have these little side adventures. And maybe the problem with Star Wars movies since Empire Strikes Back was that they're movies. They have to
yeah,
be epic, they have to be
yeah,
world shattering, they have to be
yeah,
intergalactic. Whereas a TV series doesn't have to be. It can just be, hey, I'd love to see, like, to me the greatest tragedy was like, people, oh, the prequel trilogies, what, Darth Vader, there's this whole thing. The loss for me was like, I could do without those, without ever having seen those. Like, if we could have just continued with Luke's story,
right,
what were the further adventures of Luke Skywalker? Right,
right,
his dad's dead, Empire's vanquished. Let's get on that Millennium Falcon with Han,
right.
and let's just go explore the galaxy. Let's go see what the next great adventure is. And him just kind of going like Star Trek style, planet to planet, going on
Mhm.
these little adventures. Maybe his
Like
mission is trying to develop the new Jedi Order, or whatever.
walk the earth like Kane and Kung Fu, except it's the
It's just like
galaxy.
when I watched
Yeah.
the season finale of Mandalorian, and there are two moments. The season finale of Mandalorian, where you see Luke come in and he's like kicking ass and he's just
Mhm.
wiping out those robots. Probably the most badass Luke's ever been in any movie.
Yeah.
And I just feel like I want more of this. I want to see Luke. I know he's not the coolest Jedi, but I like Luke. I really
Mhm.
identify with him as a dude. And the other one was in Revenge. Was it Return of Skywalker, Rise of Skywalker, where
Mhm.
there's a flashback with him and Leia was on her final day of Jedi training. It was them in the
Mhm.
woods, like
Mhm.
lightsaber. And like, even better. I want to see those two.
Yeah.
Let's see Han and Leia, or like Luke, Leia, and Han. Like, go. She's got a lightsaber now too. There's two Jedi's in the gang. Let's go fly around the universe. Like, could it have been something more if it was a little more like James Bondish? A little more
Yeah.
episodic.
Well, you know, I guess like I'm going to circle back for a second, kind
Okay.
of disconnected to what you're talking about, but like how you're saying everything had to be like very epic and world shattering and, just bigger, bigger, bigger.
Right.
And I think that was also one of the problems with the prequel, because here's the thing, like ultimately, especially with Revenge of the Sith, and they tried to incorporate this somewhat, but like it didn't have to be world shattering, right? Like ultimately what it boils down to with like Anakin's fall from grace is that it's a moral test. And a moral test doesn't have to be this huge earth-shattering thing. A moral test could just be whether or not you take a single life, whether or not you make one wrong decision at like a key moment. And they tried to do that somewhat, but they didn't really succeed with it, and that's unfortunate because it could have been a smaller moment, but like with galactic significance. As far as the Mandalorian and stuff like that, they got back to the roots in another way because it's very obviously like lone wolf and cub,
Right.
and that's okay. That's not a problem because it gives the Mandalorian a certain significance in that there is an innocent, like a child, and he makes like a moral choice to like protect this kid. He goes back on the job because he delivers the kid, and then doesn't he go back and rescue the kid? I mean, that's the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Like he could not live with the choice that he made. And that has significance to me. That's part of what makes that great, and yeah, I mean, as far as the further adventures, yeah, I mean, like they could have just as easily done that where like, okay, we've trained Leia. Now there's 2 lightsabers in the gang. We've got the Millennium Falcon. The New Republic is set up. We don't even have to run the shit because that Princess Di looking Mon Mothma chick is going to run stuff for us. So like, let's fly through the galaxy and find new Jedis.
I mean, yeah, even if they let's say, because I think Mark Hamill has been on record saying like he would have been on board, for as many as they wanted to make. So Harrison Ford wasn't going to come back. They only got him back for Return of the Jedi by promising him this is the last one.
Right.
So, whether Carrie Fisher would have come back, I think eventually she would have, because, her career was like Harrison Ford was the only one that had like a legit superstar career.
Right.
But, if you got Mark Hamill on board, he's really the only one you need for that. Just he could be like Kane from Kung Fu or something, just wandering around the galaxy, looking for Jedis, whatever. And they could have just kept the
you could have got
train
Billy
rolling.
D. Williams, you don't.
I like Billy D. Williams. I was really that was one of the bright spots of Rise of Skywalker,
right?
Which I enjoy overall. But like hey, it's Billy D. Williams, hey, So it was cool that he was in there. But
so I mean, they could have put together something. It's just that I suppose that for me, I just really like that idea of what happens once they become the entrenched power structure, and Luke kind of setting up his whole own Jedi Order. I even like that because like with them being sort of a wedded or mated couple, like Leia and Han kind of become the sort of representatives of the new Republic or the new order or whatever it is, and Luke maybe making a moral decision where like they're setting up a new republic, but the same thing that happened to the old republic could happen to the new republic. So I'm going out and I'm founding an entirely new kind of Jedi order that operates outside of the entrenched power structure.
Right.
Like we're not going to have some big temple on the capital planet and, be like this establishment force. We're going to find people, we're going to train them in new and different ways. Cause I mean, he was trained in a damn swamp, not in some high-tech school or whatever.
Right. Well, it could have been any kind. It could have been like while he's, instead of him being the hermit on the planet, he could have been out there. Oh, I'm out here doing Jedi shit, and all this crazy stuff's happening while you're up here, starting the new Knights of the Round Table. Like meanwhile, you left the stove on, and now shit's going to hell.
I like that. Left the stove on. Exactly. But I think The Mandalorian was really a big step back in the right direction. I think from what I know of your taste, and I could be wrong, I think you'll probably like Andor, but it might be a little more grim. I mean, it's not super grim and gritty like Sin City, Star Wars or whatever, but
Disney Plus has where you can watch the Star Wars in timeline order, and you can see it's right where it is. It's not going to be a happy. It's between Empire,
right?
I mean, it's between what do you call it? Episode 3 and Episode 4. So that's like the grimmest period of the Star Wars series. I mean, you watch Rogue One and Solo. They're the grimmest times.
Yeah.
Oh, so let's touch on Solo real quick. I didn't think it was the greatest thing since sliced bread, but I actually thought it was an enjoyable little movie. And I don't know that it fit. It was kind of one of those quieter ones. The only thing it really failed at was that they didn't have Harrison Ford playing Han Solo. But when you compare it to like kind of the cluster fudge of Rise of Skywalker, again, I enjoy it, but I enjoy it as something that's flawed. Just like the prequels, I know we've been kind of ripping them hard, but I'm glad they're out there. I'd rather have that than nothing.
Yeah. I mean, well, what would I be sitting here bitching about if they hadn't made it?
Right. Just the fact that they haven't made them.
No, the Solo movie was not bad. It was I liked it. It was a little monochromatic. Maybe that's the term I'm looking for. Like it didn't have quite some of the visual pop that I guess I expect from a Star Wars film. What's the guy's name? Alden Ehrenreich or whatever. I didn't think he did a bad job as like a young, Han Solo or whatever.
I mean, Harrison, those shoes are hard to fill, so I'm not going to criticize any young actor for not being able to do that.
but it was fun. I mean, it was what it was. And, some of
I
the
kind of felt like
stuff,
it had a little bit of a Guardians of the Galaxy vibe. They were like kind of
yeah,
a gang
yeah.
of hustlers. I don't think it's a bad idea,
No, it isn't, because, heist films are like ensemble, kind of things anyway.
And what are you going to really do with Han Solo away from the gang? Of course there's going to be like heist movies, smuggling
Yeah.
movies. Um,
I think I would have, I don't know, it was fun. I liked it. And, it was, but at the same time, as we're sitting here discussing these different films, it's like a little forgettable.
oh
You know what
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean? Because like,
It was one of those things where I did enjoy it, but it kind of came away. It's kind of like with that and Mandalorian. It's like after Saw, I was like, I don't think I care about a Star Wars movie unless it's got dudes fighting with lightsabers.
hmm,
But then after watching The Mandalorian, I was like, I don't think I need lightsabers to enjoy a
yeah.
Star Wars movie.
Well, I don't think
Guys
there's
with, I
any,
think I need the guys with masks. That must
yeah.
be it.
Well, weird helmets, strange alien beings,
Synthesizing voice. Yeah.
yeah, synthesized voices or whatever,
The other fresh breath of fresh air with Mandalorian is that it introduced some novelty into Star Wars. That was the kind of thing with the movie series. Like the universe feels so small. It's just it's the Palpatines and the Skywalkers, the Palpatines and the Skywalkers. There's nothing else that matters in this universe except
Yep.
these two groups of people. And with this one, it's like, oh, there's these little, like Gina Carano's character. It's unfortunate that she kind of jacked up her career. I did enjoy Cara Dune, but I guess they'll figure out something. Ahsoka
Yeah.
Tano, like you just kind of felt like
Mhm.
the universe felt like it was getting bigger. That's the sense I get too from like the animated series as well. You watch the Clone Wars animated series, it's like those actually make the Star Wars universe feel bigger
Yeah.
rather than smaller.
I mean, just like, Ewok's Caravan of Courage. I mean,
Of course,
like the battle for Endor. These are things that
right?
expand the mythology.
Of
You know,
course, you kidding me? Star Wars, yeah. I've actually never seen any of those.
I can't even say it with a straight face.
It's crazy. Like that shows you, like to me, like the fact that those movies exist, like show me like how out of touch. Like, and again, I think Lucas is a genius, yada yada yada. But like,
Yeah.
so how out of touch with, I think with John, like I've said this about John Byrne and his art in like the direction he's gone. It's like I think he's a guy that doesn't really understand what people liked about his art.
Right.
And that's why he's gone the direction he's gone,
Right.
and his writing, like he's taken the wrong lessons from the feedback he's gotten over the years and kind of
Yeah.
I feel like that's Lucas too. And the fact that like, people are desperate for more Star Wars. We want more Star Wars. We want more Star Wars. All right. Caravan of Courage. There you go.
Let's give him
Boom.
some Ewoks.
You're
fighting.
welcome.
Yeah. Let's give him some Ewoks fighting green dudes with fucked up faces.
Right. Like it's like, why, if you want to make Star Wars the sacred thing, okay, but then don't make Caravan of Courage. Like, why not do like to me, like the low hanging fruit right now, and with Lucas at any point was just Knights of the Old Republic.
Yeah.
Just either go back in time or go forward into the future. Get away from the main time, the main Skywalker saga's timeline. Just have Jedi's doing Jedi shit. Really,
Yeah.
that's all you
Yeah.
need.
Well, you see, now you could go back and do Knights of the Old Republic, right? And you could still do like a whole kind of Fall of Camelot thing again. You could have like, the old like kind of classic Order of Jedi Knights before they become this big sprawling organization.
Yeah.
And you could have some really cool moments where the Sith or whatever are attempting to like reestablish their tyranny over like the universe. And
the only problem I have with the Knights of the Old Republic, the only thing that would be like a chink in the armor is, has there ever been a successful prequel? Because I feel like the problem with prequels is when you know where the story is going. It's like anything that happens in Knights of the Old Republic, well, we know it's going to eventually happen. They'll establish the Jedi Order. They'll be the ultimate force of peace in the galaxy. Then they'll become the Keystone Cops, and Emperor Palpatine will come over. And blah,
right.
blah, blah, blah. So that's why I almost feel like that's why I kind of like I said go back, but then as I was saying, I also added or go forward in time, because then like go past the Rise of Skywalker stuff, and like like Rey's established, she's like a legend or whatever, and she's established the new Jedi Order, and there's new Knights of the Old or the New Republic, whatever. And then I think people need that uncertainty to really get invested, because it doesn't seem like there's ever been a prequel where. Has there been a prequel?
No, not really. I mean, like, here's the thing. I really like the Lord of the Rings movies, and then they went back and they made the Hobbit trilogy. And while it's perfectly watchable, it's also and one
I
advantage.
love that Hobbit trilogy. I'm the only one in the world that loves that Hobbit trilogy.
It's perfectly watchable. There's a lot of unnecessary moments. It absolutely should not be 3 films.
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
We can take that one apart some other time. But the only thing that I was going to say, the advantage of that is that Lord of the Rings starts with Bilbo being old and passing the mantle. So, the Hobbit can kind of be successful because it's all about the adventures of this old dude who's just kind of like this bumbling like weirdo in Lord of the Rings. So it has that going for it. But just honestly, just I don't know, man. I think prequels are like a symptom of like the creative bankruptcy of like studio produced like material. You know what I mean? It's like,
well, I think that's part, but the reason they're made is because people want, like we were talking about the Clone Wars earlier. You're like, Clone Wars, whoa, what's that? Oh, I want to see. Like everyone wanted to see when, like, what was Vader like before he became Vader?
right.
How did it all go down? People want that, but then when they see it, like it's like you want to see a telling of a story you already know, and it's just, I think it can be done, but it takes a master and a lot of luck.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know, just like as an example, like I said, with the first 2 films, I was like, okay, I've been a good boy. I've been patient. I've been sitting. I've been waiting. I'm like sitting on my hands, like bouncing in my seat at this point. And when I saw the trailer for Revenge of the Sith, I was like,
everyone was amped even after the first 2 movies.
Yeah, I was like, oh my God, this is it. And
finally cut the bullshit and let's get to it. You've indulged your weird inner artist. Now it's time to put the steak on the plate.
But the thing was like my mind had kind of constructed again sort of a film that like didn't happen, and that, it's not the artist's job to give me what I want or what I think I want. But if you're going to subvert what I want, you've got to completely blow me away like out of left field. And it's, none of that ever really happened.
He kept putting in all this crap no one cared about. Like that whole storyline with Obi-Wan hunting down General Grievous on that lizard. It's like, okay, it's kind of cool to see him on the lizard, I guess, but like you're putting so much stuff in and people know it's ultimately pointless. No, General Grievous isn't going to be a big player. We know he's not a big player. That's why I should have just kept Darth Maul through the whole thing, because by then if it was Darth Maul, he was racing to kill in that scene, we would have been like, oh, finally.
You're killing me because you're bringing up stuff and now like I want to talk more, but I know it's getting late. But
all right, and that's about it. Obviously, there's a lot to discuss and potentially a lot more to discuss, but that's as good a place to cut it off as any. We hope you enjoyed this special episode of A Podcast of Mars, Star Wars edition, and we'll see you again for the 4th episode sometime in the near future.